Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fanfiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
It was late in the day in Konoha, and most were heading for their homes. Their work completed for the day. There were a few exceptions: the ninjas who worked every hour, jumping from roof to roof, and a small blonde boy who was pushing at the boundary seals for one of the clan compounds. "Stupid Otis-san," Naruto muttered as he tried to move past the barrier seals that marked the edge of his family's home. "Forgotten about me again. And he's taken me off the entrance list. I don't see why he resets it every month. Even if he is Hokage, it's not like anyone can hurt him." The 4-year-old sighed before turning and walking away. It wasn't the first time it had happened, but this was the latest in the day he had been locked out. Usually he would just wander around the main shopping district until he spotted Otis-san or Oka-san and go back with them, but now they would be inside cooking for Natsumi and Natsuki, his sisters. He knew that they had been used in the ceiling, at least as much as his 4-year-old mind could wrap itself around the concept. But so had he, and surely the bit of the Kyuubi he had was just as important as the bits his sisters had, right? Okay, so maybe the whole village idolized them and held them as the village's saviors, and maybe they would grow up to be really good kunoichi, because they were Genjutsu containers for the Kyuubi, but Otis-san wasn't, and he was the strongest ninja ever. Why could people see him and see that he could still be awesome if they gave him a chance? As to how he knew this, he had overheard his Otis-san telling his sisters that Natsumi had the yin and Natsuki had the yang. Then they had asked about him, and Otis-san frowned, as if he had forgotten something, then replied that he held the soul. Surely it was more important that he held the soul back, even if he didn't get any cool abilities or chakra boosts like they did. He hardly noticed the village as he trudged past the shops heading towards his hiding place. It wasn't much, but was someplace that was completely his and gave a good view over the main high street. If his parents did come looking for him, he would be able to see them easily without anyone seeing him and asking why he was out on his own this late at night. The main road came to a T-junction there, and at the top of the T, there was a large space behind the billboard that looked down the street. It was enclosed by buildings on the other sides and had a tarpaulin pulled over part of it from when he had been hiding there, and it had started to rain. He shivered as the cold closed in and pulled a spare blanket over himself to keep it off. He was sure they would come looking for him fairly soon, tomorrow at the latest. Stupid Otis-san. Inside the seal, Kurama sighed in relief. He had used what limited chakra he had been able to hold on to during the sealing, and the little he could take from his host to modify the mind of his sealer and those of the other ninjas so that they would not remember where the third seal was located. During the sealing, his chakra had been pulled away from his soul, using his former host chakra chains and perfect Jinchuriki abilities. His soul had then been sealed into the boy, whilst his chakra was split between yin and yang and sealed in the girls. Damn blonde ninjin and his spawn. This was the weakest he had been in a long while, possibly ever. He had no chakra and would only be able to pull a little from the host, and that would only last until he started control exercises. Then he would be stuck in this prison waiting to die. That was not a position he was willing to stay in, hence the mental modification. He had removed the knowledge of the location of his soul from the minds of those ninjin that knew where it was, which was luckily very few. He doubted he would have been able to do any more than he already had. It had, as a side effect, resulted in his host being forgotten as the sealer's son, as he agonized over having to use his children in the sealing more than the events themselves. The sealer knew he had used his children but didn't differentiate between them, allowing Kurama to wipe the fact his host had even been involved. Right now they were all having trouble remembering that the host was the sealer's son, and soon he would just be another orphan from the attack. As no one knew the seal existed, they wouldn't attempt to kill the host to get to him. As long as he never revealed his presence to the host, the only creature he could interact with on any level, he would be safe, at least until he became a ninja. But if he was armed, then the host would be more able to defend Kurama. The perfect disguise, safety, and anonymity. Kurama hoped it would do. Naruto awoke the next day, still beneath the blanket he had pulled over himself the night before. Had they not noticed he was gone? He brushed his clothes down and dropped onto the main road. Nothing. No screams of "Honorable Son, where have you been?" if it had been Natsumi or Natsuki missing. Except they'd be Honorable Daughter, obviously. While they hadn't noticed he had been gone overnight, he doubted they would notice he was gone until the afternoon at the earliest. He knew that his Ota-san had started training his sisters in being a ninja during the mornings, and though he had been asked if he wanted to join in once or twice, he had been forgotten for the other times. Well, if they were going to be mean and forget about him, then he didn't need their stupid ninja training. He would train himself and be an awesome ninja. He didn't know how, though. Maybe if he went to the library, they would have some scrolls on how to be a ninja. Naruto grinned. That would definitely be the way to go. And he doubted he would get in as much trouble if he was reading. It didn't take long for Naruto to reach the library, and the little 4-year-old was rather impressed by the amount of books and scrolls it had inside. He wondered why it was so empty, though. Surely if this was the way to becoming an awesome ninja, it should be really busy. He shrugged and wandered over to the closest set of bookshelves. Fiction, romance, he muttered to himself, reading off of the plaque on the shelves. That doesn't sound like what I want. And neither does fiction, crime. Looking around, it didn't take long for him to spot the librarian behind her desk. She would definitely know where the ninja scrolls were. Fubuki was a career chunin and had never really enjoyed fighting like some of the other frontline ninja. She had moved into an administrative position immediately following her graduation from the academy. After 5 years working in the library, she had been promoted to allow her access to some of the restricted documents. She was currently on an ongoing C-rank mission, and whilst it didn't pay as well as the frontline missions, it was enough to allow her to live comfortably. That, and she rather enjoyed it. Now, though she was leading the small child who had asked her about ninja scrolls to the public domain scrolls, she was fairly sure he wasn't actually a ninja, and as he hadn't shown any ID, she wasn't going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Most of the ninja-related scrolls in the library required the rank of Genin to view, although there were a couple that required Chunin rank to see. Most of the scrolls were to do with secondary ninja skills, survival, disguises, and the like, whilst the Nin, Jin, and Taijutsu scrolls were held by whoever had created the jutsu, their students, or their clan. This was why most Konoha ninjas had similar core skills, but then developed their styles similar to their sensei or clan. The few academy-level scrolls she had were the standard ones given out by the academy, supplementary ones for other areas, such as Fūinjutsu or Iryōjutsu, or advanced, at least for academy level, Nin, Jin, or Taijutsu. These are the ones you're looking for, I believe, she said to Naruto, who was looking at the scrolls with interest. You don't have a library card, so you can't remove the scrolls, and the use of jutsu in the library is prohibited. However, you are free to take notes from the scrolls and copy down what you need. I'd recommend starting with the scroll called An Introduction to Ninja. Is there anything else I can help you with? Naruto shook his head and watched the librarian walk away. Turning back to the bookshelves, he pulled a few interesting scrolls off the shelves along with the one she had recommended. He settled down in a nearby chair and started to read the first scroll. Soon he'd be an awesome ninja. An hour had passed, and Naruto had finished reading the first scroll. He had thought before that ninjas were all awesomely powerful warriors like his Ota-san and Oka-san, but the scroll said that all ranks and positions of ninja were necessary. Whilst frontline ninja brought the largest percentage of income into the village itself wouldn't be able to function without the large support structure that was behind them. Administrative ninja, like the librarian, he thought, medical ninja, courier ninja, the list went on and on. It was unlikely that they would ever see combat, but they had been trained for it and could defend themselves, although most of their training revolved around keeping the village's secrets safe. What the scroll really tried to impress was that these ninja were just as important as the frontline ninjas, perhaps more so given their considerable rarity and the amount of training required to make one. It gave examples such as the couriers who ended a war by delivering messages through the war zone itself, medics who saved the lives of the Hokages, and border guards who prevented the village from being surprised by invaders. It went on to say that a lot of the more specialized roles required high levels of chakra control rather than a greater chakra capacity, which was why most of the ninja clan were frontline rather being held back to fill other positions. He liked the sound of that. It seemed that it would be much more challenging than being a frontline ninja, and even if he failed at it, he could fall back to being that. Plus, it would be really different from his parents' styles. Stupid Oda-san. He pulled his scroll-marked basic control exercises over and started to read it. Leaf concentration exercise? He thought, is that useful? It had been a few days since then, and Naruto was started to get bored of sleeping behind the billboard. He had been debating sleeping in the woods, but that would have been worse than his current spot. He had started looking around Konoha to see if he could find a better place that was more protected from the environment, and believed he had found a decent spot in some abandoned buildings. By the looks of it, they had been damaged during the Kyuubi attack, and most of them were little more than a few walls leaning against each other. One, however, wasn't in as bad a state as the others. It was a small apartment building by the look of it, and yes, it was missing the entire south wall and part of the east, but the northwest corner looked relatively untouched, and it was here that Naruto was prodding around at the moment. He had found an apartment that wasn't too badly damaged and decided that this was probably a better place to stay than behind the billboard. Given that he still hadn't been noticed as missing from home, he had realized that his parents had forgotten about him and stopped bothering to watch the main road to see if anyone would be looking for him. Most of his time had been spent either in the library reading from the scrolls or behind the billboard practicing what he had learned. He'd also looked through the academy scrolls to see what he would be doing when he joined, as there was no point learning anything twice. He would wait until then to start learning about the Academy 3 Jutsu, but decided that he would start on weapons training as that was only lightly touched upon, mainly by throwing kunai and shuriken. He doubted he would be able to buy a sword or something similar, but a quick scour of the training grounds had found him a couple of damaged kunai and shuriken. The ones that weren't broken were fairly easy to find and recover, and most ninja didn't want to waste them for no reason. Senbon, however, were a different matter. He had easily found plenty of bent ones on one training ground, and a look in one of the outfitters revealed why. They were damn cheap. He had taken a few minutes to straighten them out, and, whilst being much more difficult to use than kunai, he had quickly gotten the hang of them, even if his accuracy did leave a lot to be desired. He had also continued with the leaf concentration exercise, which was much harder than it looked, although the scroll did impress just how serious an issue chakra control was, and could just about hold the leaf on his forehead. The next step was trying to hold 2 leaves, and, well, that wasn't going very well at all. He thought the problem was the size of his reserves, but he wasn't sure. He wasn't going to let it get him down, however. He was still going to be an awesome ninja. Before Naruto knew it, a month had passed. A month living on his own in an abandoned building. He had rigged up a system to get the shower to work, consisting of a barrel, cut in half with a kunai, that had been filled up with rainwater and piped into his showers. It only had one temperature, that of freezing cold, but it kept him fairly clean, so he wasn't planning on changing it. The scroll on surviving in the wilderness had been particularly useful, showing what roots and berries could be eaten and how to catch fish. That had been a rather disgusting experience, and he had learnt not to hold the fish in your lap when you were gutting and filleting it. The rest of his studies were coming on particularly well, although the lack of proper tools had held him back a little. And this had led to his current scroll, Poisons of Konoha, with which he had started gather up some ingredients. He had wondered why some of the plants were listed in the survival scroll as do not eat, but having read their description in this one, he was glad he hadn't experimented. Some of them were nasty. The one he was preparing at the moment was a fairly slow-acting, temporary paralysis poison, suitable for coating weapons with. He was planning to test it on some of the fish in one of the streams, if he could hit them with a Senbon, although he would prefer to use it on something larger, like a rabbit or something similar. He had gotten fairly accurate with the Senbon, as in most of them hit the target, but he wanted to be hitting bullseyes all the time, and he was still far off from that. He couldn't hit the target at all if he was moving, unless it was a fluke. He had also started reading the scroll on Fūinjutsu, even if he couldn't start drawing his own until he was at least a genin due to the next set of scrolls location in the library, and had been using it to identify and decode existing seals. Whilst only simple seal components were covered in the bit he had read so far, he had seen how some of these fit together to make a storage seal. He knew the seal on his stomach contained the Kyuubi, and he thought it might be constructed from similar components to storage seal, but he couldn't have been more wrong. He didn't understand any of its components, not even one. It was kind of depressing. He thought he had been doing well. Eventually, the months turned into years as Naruto grew. The village continued to recover from the Kyuubi's attack, and Naruto himself grew stronger. He had grown a fair bit, standing at about 4 foot 4 inches, although he was still quite thin thanks to his hunter's diet. He was wearing a pair of gray trousers, taped down at the bottom into his black sandals, with a shuriken pouch bound to his right leg. He had a long-sleeved gray shirt on with a green jacket over the top of it. He had a bandana covering his blonde hair, as it wasn't exactly inconspicuous, and a set of goggles over his eyes or forehead, depending on whether he was using them or not. He still wasn't old enough to start practicing taijutsu or increasing his strength, however, but his accuracy with Senbon was pretty good, bullseyes being scored about half the time, though that dropped to a third if he was moving or the target was. That had been some odd practice. He had been running in circles, throwing lumps of wood in the air and trying to hit them with his Senbon before they hit the ground. It was difficult but useful, as he doubted many enemies would just stand still and let them hit him, or give him time to stop and line up the throw. His chakra control was quite good now. He had started combining the water concentration exercises with tree walking. He had to channel chakra to his feet to allow him to walk up the walls of his apartment whilst also holding a disc of water on the palms of his hands. It definitely wasn't as easy as it sounded. The chakra flow to each foot had to be constant, whilst the flow to each hand had to vary to keep the water in a disc shape and attached to his hand. He hadn't been very good at it in the beginning, hence the growing patch of damp in one corner of his apartment. Today was the day he got better, though. He had signed himself up for the academy a few weeks earlier, and he had been told to return for opening ceremony, which was in an hour's time. He was fairly sure he had everything he needed. A couple of blank scrolls, kunai and shuriken were in his pouch, whilst the remainder of the space had been filled with a dozen Senbon. His last checks all done, he closed the door to his apartment and started to make his way out of the building. The stairs down had been ruined in the attack, and he used to have to climb up and down, but learning tree walking allowed him to stroll down the walls. It was a bit of a walk to get to the academy, given he lived on the outskirts of the village, but he had plenty of time until it started. 20 minutes later, he arrived to see quite a large crowd milling around outside of the academy building. He recognized his mother, her long red hair a dead giveaway, with Natsumi and Natsuki talking to some other girls their own age. Both of them had their hair fairly long, blonde for Natsumi, like their Otis-san, and red for Natsuki, which she got from their Oka-san. They were wearing orange skirts with black shorts on underneath along with an orange shirt and jacket. All in all, it wasn't the most camouflaged of outfits. By the looks of it, they were talking to a Hyuga, and Naruto spotted several other clans milling about, Inuzuka and Akimichi, two of the more obvious, their nin dogs and weight giving them away. If the group of people near the Akimichi were who he thought they were in a few years' time, there would probably be a new Inoshikacho team, the platinum blonde hair and slouched postures giving them away. The rest of the crowd looked to be mainly civilian families, except one who could be Uchihas, their bright colors giving them away. He watched them for a while before noticing a father and son pair stood off to the side and looking a bit isolated. The high collars and concealed faces, along with the space everyone was giving them, meant they were probably Aburame. Generally quiet and logical, they sounded like his kind of people, and with that in mind, Naruto wandered over to speak with them. Hi, I'm Naruto. Are you starting the academy as well today? He mentally slapped himself. What a great introduction. The younger of the two glanced up and, upon receiving a nod from the elder Aburame, introduced himself. I am Shino Aburame, and I am indeed starting today. You are a civilian-born student, are you not? How do I know, you may ask? You have not been escorted by another member of your clan, and I am unaware of any other of the clan heir beginning today. In fact, I may surmise that you are in fact an orphan. Naruto stared. The scroll just didn't get across how logical he would be, although he didn't seem too quiet. Indeed, I am an orphan. I lost my family because of the Kyuubi attack. Not quite a lie. From a certain point of view, he thought. Have you done any prior ninja training? Aburame clan members are traditionally introduced. Insects, Naruto asked. Are they useful? They are very useful at gather information and can be used offensively, although I have yet to learn those techniques. Do you have a specialty? I don't have too much to my name, but I'm fairly good with Senbon and poisons, as well as a couple of chakra control exercises, he replied as they turned to head into the academy building. There are a couple of species of poisonous insects that I am rather interested in. Shibi looked on with pride as his son and his new friend walked into the academy, still discussing the poisons they had found. He knew Shino had been a little nervous about not making any friends and had stifled a small smile as his son had started to babble, a nervous tic he had picked up from other members of his clan. The boy, Naruto he had said his name was, seemed nice enough and they obviously shared interests, although he hadn't expected the civilian-born child to know any ninja techniques. Shino would be able to tell him later if the boy had been truthful or not. And with the agreement between Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha, the Leaf Village was founded. The villagers choose Hashirama Senju as the shodaime, and because of this Madara Uchiha eventually left the village, culminating in their battle at the Valley of the End. It had been a few weeks since the opening ceremony and Naruto and Shino were sat at the back of the classroom taking notes. They rather enjoyed each other's company over that of some of their louder classmates, Hiba and the twins, the worst offenders. The entire class had been asked to introduce themselves on the first day, and them jumping out of their chairs and shouting about how awesome they were had not endeared them to the quieter members of class. Shikamaru and Choji were sat over in the corner, Shikamaru slumped over asleep, and Choji munching on a packet of crisps. They seemed to be fairly close friends as both were fairly laid back, or in Shikamaru's case, asleep. They were a group of girls clustered together in the middle rows led by Ino Yamanaka. Most of them seemed not to be particularly serious ninja candidates. Ami and Fuki were more concerned with their looks, and Kasumi wouldn't stop staring at Sasuke. Sasuke himself was an odd one. He was the second son of the clan head, something he pointed out with pride whenever he had the chance, and seemed to idolize his older brother. He had a huge superiority complex, but never seemed pleased with anything he did, always saying that he should have done better or that Itachi's would have been perfect. Whoever Itachi was. That was most of the people who had stuck in his memory, although the ones who hadn't were probably people he could actually be friends with. There were a couple of other people who caught his eye, mainly because of their looks, the twins' red and blonde hair sticking out, but there was also a pink-haired girl sat a bit apart from the others, and a set of boys who just would not calm down. He turned his attention back to the lecture just in time to hear how Mito Senju sealed the Kyuubi inside herself, a slight twinge in his chest at that, and continued taking notes. They were being taught this stuff for a reason, right? Most of the rest of their first year was taken up by the theoretical stuff and the background information. Things all ninja should be aware of that explained why each faction would react in its own way and remember as not to cause an incident. History of the village, history of other hidden villages, history of Fire Country, history of the other countries. The list went on, everything having some form of history behind it. People, jutsu, places, a ninja had to know all of it, on the off chance it might be needed. You were expected to know that IWA ninja would react badly to Kumo ninja wearing the symbol of the Kinkakubutai, especially if they were some of the older active service ninja, because of some obscure battle that took place 40 years ago and was of no direct relevance to Konoha. He supposed it was better learning now when they were still too young to learn the practical aspects of ninja life than having to learn it just before a crucial mission or when they could be doing practical training, but it was a bit cramped. It was also one of the first things dropped in times of war because, let's face it, who cares about creating a diplomatic incident when you're at war? History wasn't the only thing they learned. Geography of the terrain surrounding Konoha was expected to be known in excruciating detail to give the greatest home advantage over any invading force. Expected terrain in and around neutral territories for reinforcement of allies and capture of the opposing forces' allies. And what could be gleaned of the terrain around the other four great hidden villages and the lesser villages scattered around the minor countries. Linked into this was strategy and tactics training. How to use the remembered terrain to create choke points and ambushes, how to link up with allying forces, and cut of enemy lines of communication, supply, and retreat. There were lessons on confronting a single, more powerful enemy or groups of less powerful enemies, how to counter an offensive doton or a defensive right unuser, broad categories that supposedly could be combined to defeat any enemy. Naruto was a bit of a skeptic on that. Oh, they were perfectly viable if you were an expert in every field of ninja combat, but nobody was. Everyone specialized to some degree, and that would always be their primary method of dealing with any enemy. They would step back and use all these lessons or try to reason out the enemy's technique and try to counter it if their primary method didn't work, but in the real world, out there on the battlefield, you wouldn't get a chance to step back because you'd be dead, countered and killed by the enemy in that crucial moment in which you realized your specialization wasn't working. He still enjoyed them as theoretical lessons, though, some of the strategies having obviously been refined through many years off use, every person adding a slightly better way to do this move or that attack. Some were amazingly difficult and really complicated to get your head round, whilst others were beautiful in the simplicity and ingenuity. Other things weren't related to practical combat at all, such as etiquette and conduct, showing you how to act in the presence of your client, be they peasant or daimyo, how to hold yourself in front of civilians so they knew you were a ninja, and how to hide that so they thought you were a civilian, how to act on a mission and how to keep to the shinobi rules, and also when the shinobi rules could be bent in the rare circumstances they could be broken altogether. Some things were related to the parts that made them ninja, rather than a flashier version of the Land of Iron Samurai. How to move so that you aren't heard and how to move so that you are and sound like a civilian. How to hide the instinctive movements of a ninja, and how to spot that others were hiding that. Disguises and cover identities were gone over, as well as how well to construct them, from completely perfect to fooling Jinin, Chunin, and Jonin, to falling apart at the slightest probing. Almost all of the class had passed the first year, one person repeating because they messed up on the tests and Tobio dropping out altogether because he didn't think he could do it. Naruto and Shino had made friends with Shikamaru and Choji over the course of the year, occasional games of shogi between them, whilst the others watched insects or the clouds, and visits to each other's homes. Not Naruto's and Shino's though, not after the first time. Today class will be continuing with the leaf concentration exercise, Suzume-sensei said, more than a few members of class groaning. I am aware that some of you may have completed this already, but I'd like you all to practice anyway, so I can see what level you're on. Naruto sighed, but took one of the leaves that were being handed out. Their theoretical lessons continued well into their second year, but eventually they were allowed to start on the practical portions. Nothing too strenuous, unlocking their chakra, which had taken some of the civilian boys no small amount of time, and the basic control exercises that they were doing today. None of the clan children really enjoyed these, having been taught them at a younger age, along with some of the more dedicated civilian children, of which Naruto was believed to be. What they had enjoyed was the throwing weapons lessons. Naruto had especially enjoyed these. The chance to throw a well-balanced kunai or shuriken was not something he was going to pass over. Since he had to scavenge his weapons from the training grounds, he didn't get very many of them. Senbon were viewed as a more disposable weapon, and they were had to spot if you lost them. whilst most ninja would diligently check the training grounds once they had finished and collect all of their weapons, save those that were too damaged to use again. These were the weapons that Naruto used: kunai with a bent blade or bad balance, and shuriken with a prong missing or chips. On the other hand, the Senbon he found were generally in good condition, which accounting for his impressive, at least for his age, accuracy with them. All the weapons handed out by the academy though were fresh out of the forge, perfectly balanced, and a pleasure to use. He was pretty good with them, but there were plenty of people better. Sasuke for one seemed to constantly do bizarre kunai drills when he was at home, then demonstrate them in front of the class and complain that he still wasn't as good as Itachi. Itachi, he discovered, was Sasuke's elder brother, an AMBU captain, and one of the greatest prodigies ever to come out of the academy. Quite why Sasuke thought he should be on his level when he was about 5 years younger, he didn't know. Unfortunately for his place in the class rankings, Senbon weren't covered in the academy curriculum, and he couldn't demonstrate his impressive accuracy with them to his friends, and it would have been nice to use some that were properly balanced, rather than ones that had been hammered between bricks until they were straight again. It was only a few weeks later that Sasuke disappeared from class. Naruto didn't really pay attention to what the adults said or many of those students outside of his circle of friends, but he would have to have been deaf not to hear the rumors about the Uchihas. No one quite knew what had actually happened, but Naruto got the gist of it. It seemed that Itachi, Sasuke's prodigious elder brother, had gone insane and killed a great deal of the active duty Uchihas. More specifically, according to one rumor, anyone in his clan who had unlocked the Sharingan and could challenge him with it. These rumors also said that Itachi had spared Sasuke, claiming him too weak to ever unlock the Sharingan, then fleeing the village before the Hokage caught up with him. He felt quite sorry for Sasuke, mainly because his family had been killed, both his parents having been Jonin and having activated their Sharingans, but also because those closest to him never believed him would amount to anything. That was just his opinion, though. Many of the girls in his class thought of him as a tragic hero, fighting against a world that wanted to see him fail and would beat him down at any opportunity. They had even formed a fan club, led by Ino and, for some reason, Sakura, who had gone from being a quiet introvert who mainly cared about her studies, to being just as loud and fanatical about Sasuke as Ino. They believed that they could be the ones to support him and heal his broken heart, and that in return he would give them his undying love. Naruto thought this was a load of crap. He only had this opinion reinforced when Sasuke returned to class a brooding emo. In theory lessons, he would sit and stare at the board the entire time, answering any questions with a HN or ignoring them completely. Practical lessons became the rest of the boys' bane as Sasuke, already the top of the class in Taijutsu by some way, stopped holding back and would mercilessly pummel anyone who had to spar against him. The girls in the class just lapped this up, of course, claiming that he was showing his repressed needs and desires. There were, however, a couple of girls who seemed not to care that Sasuke was such a lonely boy who needed someone to heal his broken heart, in the words of some of them. The twins and Hinata Hyuga were the most prominent among them, but there were others. Those three, however, had attained similar status amongst the boys as Sasuke had among the girls. They had even started referring to them as the three princesses, the ruby, sapphire, and gold princesses, based, rather unimaginatively, on their hair colors. There had originally been 4 princesses, but seeing Ino chew one of the boys out for daring to try and come between her and her precious Sasuke-kun had sent the rest of them running. The twins were still quite exuberant, and a lot of the boys, mainly led by Kiba, who was using Sasuke's new drive to improve himself, and quickly too, tried to show off in front of them by doing ever more outlandish acts and exaggerated feats. These were better received by Natsuki than Natsumi, who seemed to approve of the more intelligent of those who tried to impress her. Hinata, as the shy, demure one, gave no indication of her favorite and seemed quite happy to let the twins soak up the attention. Naruto didn't care one way or the other. Yes, they were his sisters, but he hadn't really thought of them like that for a while. They were just his classmates. He thought most of this true love stuff was more than a little stupid. They were only 9 after all, and even if girls developed earlier than boys, surely they were too young for those kinds of changes to set in. They were soon moving on, however, and the loss of all the active duty Uchihas was quickly pushed to the back of everyone's minds, save perhaps Sasuke's. They were introduced to their first ninjutsu, the transformation jutsu, which was remarkably simple. Imagine the image you want, then push your chakra into it. He could just about manage to do it, although he looked a little featureless and washed out, but he had his high reserves to account for that. The twins got it perfectly the first time, even if their sensei did note that their technique was a bit off and used the wrong hand seals. Whilst it wouldn't fool experienced Chunin and Jonin, the technique was a quick and easy way to disguise yourself against civilians, fellow academy students, and genin. After that, you would have to learn the more advanced techniques, such as chakra suppressing and eventually physical disguises. Their lessons continued in this way for quite a few months, occasionally introducing new classes, flower arranging and seduction for the girls, whilst the boys were given extra time to do control exercises. Eventually, they were introduced to the other jutsu of the Academy 3, the transformation and substitution. The clone jutsu was remarkably like the transformation, merely with the added factor of concentrating not only on your image but also on where you wanted it to form. He was rather surprised to see the twins present a note to their sensei, begging off the technique, as they had too much chakra. Had they not been doing the same control exercise as he was? And if they hadn't, how had they managed to do the transformation? He rather enjoyed this technique, and when they were allowed to spar whilst using ninjutsu, he would quickly confuse his opponent, clouds of smoke hiding his transformation into a rock or some other incongruous piece of debris off to the side, whilst the clones he summoned would mislead the opponent and herd them towards his hidden position, where H could easily take them out. The last technique they learnt was the substitution and, upon hearing its description, was determined to get it down, as it seemed the most useful. It was like a get-out-of-jail-free card. First, you had to extend a piece of your chakra and grab a hold of the object you wanted to switch with, the amount of chakra being greater for a smaller object, then pulling on that and yourself so that you flew together at high speed. Then you had to move yourself around the object, one of the more difficult bits, as Hibachi demonstrated by moving at full speed straight into the log he was trying to switch with. His nose always was a bit crooked after that. He managed the jutsu fairly quickly though, and when he did, he kept practicing until he didn't have to call out its name. That wasn't enough though, as most of his strategies required him to be out of sight to begin their usage. He kept practicing until he could start dropping the hand seals. It took him a week each to drop boar and ox from the sequence, but dog and ram took the better part of a month. Getting rid of snake took him nearly half a year, but during that time it was easy enough for him to drop a quick snake seal into whatever jutsu he was attempting and switch out if he was in danger. The first time he tried it was with Shinta, who'd thought he managed to work out what Naruto had been doing during their previous spars. He was correct as well, but this time Naruto decided to switch out with a rock rather than transform into it. Shinta played along with the clones and moved closer and closer to the rock. He then spun and kicked it as hard as he could, hoping to get Naruto, only to end up breaking his toes. Naruto won fairly quickly after that. These matches, where he messed with his opponent's head almost continuously, kept him fairly high in the class rankings even if he was held back by his rather average taijutsu score. Shino was a little above him, thanks to his insect clones, and very few people wanted to touch him, even in spars, whilst Choji and Shikamaru were in the lower half, neither trying too hard to show off, Choji because he preferred to eat and Shikamaru because he preferred to do nothing. Top spot was held by Sasuke, with only Kiba trying to contest it, even if everyone doubted he would ever catch up with him. The top kunoichi was Sakura, who fought off any challenges to her position rather viciously. Apparently, she had found that the top male and female students were always paired together, along with the dead last. This led to quite a few of Sasuke's fangirls deliberately failing every test they were given in an attempt to secure that last position on Sasuke's team. Close behind her were the princesses, none of them really wanting the place on Sasuke's team, and thus none of them putting their full effort forward. This led to their admirers slacking off as well, allowing Sasuke to pull even further ahead of everyone else score-wise. It seemed that Naruto was the only civilian boy who wasn't interested in them, and still tried his hardest. It wouldn't be until the middle of their 4th year that they were given their introduction to Genjutsu. It wasn't a very long set of lessons, a bit of the theory behind them along with how to recognize and dispel them, but it was enough to get Naruto hooked. A quick look through the library found Naruto few Genjutsu scrolls. Most were donated by the Uchiha clan or another called the Kurama clan, along with a few donated by individuals, mainly a woman called Yui. They were all fairly simple, just creating simple intangible images in the air or moving everything a certain distance in each direction, although one called demonic illusion, false surroundings, seemed the most useful. Especially since it referenced something called layering, he'd have to look into that. And indeed it was the most useful. Whilst the others were good distractions, a use of it on Hibachi during one of their spars had him walking in circles and swinging punches at thin air for a few minutes until Yamano-sensei eventually took pity on him and released him from it. It became a staple of his fighting style and allowed him to win a lot more of his spars, except against Hinata, whose Byakugan saw through any and all illusions he tried to cast over her. He got quite good at attaching them to her subtly, so that she wouldn't notice them, but by then everyone knew he would try illusions, and she simply flared it on every time. Unfortunately, his reliance on illusions caused his taijutsu ranking to drop as he became so unused to actually fighting his enemies face to face, much preferring to pull up an illusion and poison them. He'd tried it once in class and got it through chewing out for endangering his classmates with unknown toxic substances. It didn't stop him from poisoning his Senbon though, it merely stopped him from using them in open combat. It wouldn't be until the end of their last year that they were offered a couple of quick first aid lessons. Whilst these started off as bandaging wounds and splinting broken bones, they moved on to basic Iryōjutsu once anyone with poor control dropped out, which ended up being most of the boys, save him and Shikamaru, but his lazy friend dropped out when given the choice. The second lesson, however, ended up being a dissection of an animal body so they could see what each part was, which caused most of the girls to drop out, leaving only he and Hinata in the class. They learned about pressure points and vital points, places to avoid damaging if you wanted your patient to get better, and the first places you should heal if they were damaged. He took note of these, along with the positions of main veins and arteries, as they would be lethal if he could reliably hit them a Senbon or get poison into their bloodstream. Unfortunately, these classes didn't last long. A lack of things to teach and people to teach them resulted in the class's abrupt end, to Naruto's dismay. And so they began to finish up on their time at the academy. Naruto had grown closer to Shino, Choji, and Shikamaru, the four of them often seen together even if their conversations were rather quite quiet. The four of them were clustered in their corner of the classroom, waiting for their Genin exam to begin. They'd completed the written part earlier in the day and had been given a few hours break before the practical, during which most of their classmates had gone home, whilst the three of them had watched clouds in Shikamaru's favorite spot. Currently, they were trying to reassure Choji that he would be fine, who was so nervous he had eaten several packets of crisps. "You'll be fine, Choji-san," Shino said, his voice as monotone as ever. "Why, you ask? You have worked hard several years to get to this level, and it is only your own confidence that holds you back. We would not push you forwards if we did not believe you could do it." Way to reassure him there, Shino, Naruto deadpanned. "But he's right, Choji. You've worked hard. You'll be fine. Back me up on this, Shikamaru." "Troublesome," the last Nara muttered. "Just go for it. You can always try again." Naruto's eyebrow twitched. Was he the only one who was going to help Choji? "Aburame, Shino," Iruka-sensei called out. "Good luck, Shino," Naruto said. "You'd better come back with a forehead protector." "That would only be logical," Shino replied, "seeing as I am going to pass." "Just go, Shino." Regardless of whether they passed or not, students didn't come back into the class, so a few minutes later when Choji was called they still had no idea whether or not Shino had managed to pass. They didn't doubt him. He had the highest class rank of all of them, and if he didn't pass it was unlikely the rest of them would. With Choji going into the exam room, Naruto and Shikamaru began to wait for their own names to be called. Likely for Shikamaru, Naruto was there to wake him up as it had taken him only a few minutes for him to fall asleep, regardless of the noise their classmates were making. Nara, Shikamaru. Shikamaru, you're up. Shikamaru, Shikamaru. Naruto began shaking the lazy clan air, some of his classmates laughing at him. You're up, you lazy ass. Thanks, he muttered as he sloped off to the exam room. With that, Naruto was left on his own, and he spent the remainder of his time watching his classmates. He would be the last of his class to go, just behind Ino, as he hadn't registered himself at the academy with a surname. A couple of the boys were trying to impress the twins, Hinata having already gone through, and the girls were mainly trying to cozy up to Sasuke, who was once again staring at the blackboard like nothing else mattered. He hoped he would get put on a team with his friends, but they were all fairly sure that Shikamaru and Choji would end up with Ino, given their family's history with each other. Whilst he and Shino might end up together, Shino had a tracking specialization, with Naruto being a general support member, and so their pairing would probably depend on their sensei, and if they wanted them. He was snapped out of his thoughts by Iryōjutsu sensei calling his name and quickly pulled himself out of his seat, then wandered down the stairs and into the exam room. It was fairly basic, a desk that Iryōjutsu sensei and Mizuki sensei were sat behind, and a couple of logs leaning up against one of the walls, probably for substitution jutsus. Okay, Naruto, you've passed the written exam, so we're now going to test you on your ninjutsu. I'd like you to demonstrate a transformation into one of the Hokages. You choice which. Iryōjutsu sensei said, a keen eye on his student. Naruto paused. He could transform into his Otis-san, but that would just promote the similarities they had. If they were going to remember him, he wanted it to be because they had remembered him, not because someone had told them. He shrugged to himself. Might as well start at the beginning. Performed the hand seals, and with a puff of smoke transformed into the Shodame. Okay, next I'd like you to create at least 3 clones, please. Again, Naruto quickly ran through the hand seals, and 5 clones appeared with their accompanying puffs of smoke. He could have done less, but he had 5 yen on getting a higher class ranking than Shino, with Shino himself. Excellent, Iryōjutsu sensei commented. Now I'd like you to substitute with one of the logs on your left, please. Not even bothering with the hand seals, Snake having been removed a few months ago, Naruto quickly substituted with one of the logs. Perfect. I think we can award bonus marks with that display, can't we, Mizuki? Iryōjutsu sensei said, his question directed to Mizuki sensei next to him. Do you have a jutsu that you'd like to show us for bonus marks? He nodded and quickly started running through hand seals. He cast his chakra out and slowly looped it round Mizuki sensei's. Demonic illusion, false surroundings. Mizuki sensei sat there quite still for a moment before bringing his hands up. Another minute passed before the light in his eyes came back, and he started speaking. Kai. You're out now, Mizuki, Iryōjutsu sensei interrupted. Out of interest, how many layers was it? At least 3. After that I'm not sure. Mizuki sensei commented. I only got out because I know how much Naruto tends to cast them. Someone who hadn't encountered him before could have a bit of trouble. Definitely a pass. Well, Naruto, Iryōjutsu sensei said. You heard the man, you've passed. Take your forehead protector and wait outside with the others, will you? We'll be out in a moment to give the graduation speech and with the class rankings. Thanks, senseis, Naruto said, a smile across his face. I'll let the others know. He hurried out and quickly spotted Shino, Choji, and Shikamaru standing with their parents, along with Ino's, and moved over to them. Everyone passed then? He asked. Indeed, Shino replied. It would be illogical if we had not. Not to mention how much my mother would find it troublesome if I failed, Shikamaru interjected. You do realize she stood right behind you, don't you? Huh. Troublesome. He sighed, just as his mother's fist came down upon his head. Naruto stifled a chuckle under Yoshino's glare. From what he'd gathered from his occasional visits to Shikamaru's clan compound, she was a rather controlling woman who had to put up with a lazy husband and son, much like most other women in the Nara clan. He turned in time to hear Iryōjutsu-sensei call everyone to attention and say that the yondaime was about to give the graduation speech, just as the man himself stepped up to the podium. Boys and girls, or rather, shinobi and kunoichi, the yondaime started. You have all graduated the academy and are now official ninjas of the Leaf. You will be expected to uphold the honor of the Leaf Village and carry out your missions to the best of your ability. Naruto listened to his Otis-san, who was currently in his official Hokage mode, speak about how their duties and the expectations placed on them. Most of this they had already learned, but hearing it from such a powerful ninja would really make them remember it. And return here tomorrow for your team assignments. Go forth, and take the will of fire with you. Applause broke out as parents clapped for their children and pulled them into their embrace. He could see his Oka-san over with the twins and his Otis-san moving over towards them. Now of all days, he would want them to be here with him to keep away the loneliness. But he was set on this path and he had been for years. Second thoughts would be way too late. He started as Choji's father, clapped him on the shoulder. We're having a celebration barbecue at our compound, Naruto-kun. Would you like to join us? He smiled to himself. Perhaps he wouldn't be so lonely after all. It was a good day for Minato Uzumaki Namikaze. His beautiful twin daughters, he ignored the slight twinge, had passed the academy and were now ninja. He was a little worried for them. What parent wouldn't be? But he was sure they would be fine. Especially with their sensei. There were very few people he would trust his children with, but his wife Kushina was one of them. She was perched on his desk at the moment, looking over his shoulder at the other graduates of the academy as they tried to work to who would fill the third spot on her and their daughter's team. Why don't we just ask them, Minato-kun? There's probably someone they would prefer to have on their team. I suppose you're right, Kushi-chan. I just want what's best for. He was interrupted by the door to his office banging open and his daughters rushing in. A small hand gesture prevented the ANBU guards from attacking them, as he had to do with everyone who came through the door, regardless of how often they came. Then twins were almost exactly identical. Aside from Natsuki having red hair compared to Natsumi's blonde, they were just over 5 foot in height and just starting to enter puberty. Oh, how he was looking forward to that. Their clothes hadn't changed much from when they had started the academy. A black pair of shorts and a t-shirt with an orange skirt and jacket over the top. Only now they had the new addition of their hatae wrapped over their forehead. Oda-san, Oka-san, Natsuki shouted, Natsumi following her a little more quietly. We passed. So let's get some ramen to celebrate. Have you decided who'll be the last member of our awesome team? His wife squealed and pulled them into her arms, babbling on about how proud she was of them. He loved his family. He really did. But sometimes he wished they had gotten more from him than just Natsumi's hair color. There was that twinge again. Someone calm he could sit down and teach his seals too, rather than the massively flashy ninjutsu that the girls were fond of. He was wrenched out of his thoughts by Kushina nabbing the files of the other graduating genin. He had looked to see if there was a more experienced ninja to fill in the place, but he didn't want to break up a complete team or separate the remaining two, in some cases. What about Sasuke Uchiha girls? Kushina started. He's very skilled and you could definitely rely on him. No. Natsumi said, a slight frown on her face. He doesn't work well with anyone and he's such an ass. How about Kiba Inuzuka? He's the next strongest and... No. Natsuki shouted. He's one of our fanboys. I can't put up with him every day. Next is Shino Abura. No. Natsumi interrupted. He's creepy. Minato rolled his eyes. They had a whole clan of Aburames. The girls would have to get over them being creepy rather quickly. Okay, he continued. How about Naruto? Huh, just Naruto it seems. Natsumi and Natsuki looked at each other before shrugging. Not someone I remember. What's he good at? Highly proficient in Genjutsu and more than a passing interest in Iryōjutsu is what his record says, and a note saying that he is more adept with Senbon than traditional kunai and shuriken. In his picture, he's got blue eyes. Not sure what color his hair is. He's got a bandana and goggles over it, and a green coat. Ring any bells? Minato replied. I think so. Natsumi said, her brow scrunched up in thought. He always sat with Shino, Shikamaru and Choji, always seemed a bit quiet to me. I don't remember them. Natsuki said. They weren't our fanboys and are all fairly quiet. Sat in the back corner, remember them? Natsuki's face was still blank. Minato sighed. Natsuki was all Kushina. He could never have been that oblivious, right? While he complements your team quite well, you three are primarily Ninjutsu and Taijutsu. And Genjutsu. You'd promised you'd teach us that. Natsumi interjected. When I trust you not to cut yourselves with your own swords, I will let Kushi-chan teach you. Anyway, he would be a good support member, especially with more illusions and proper training in Iryōjutsu. Okay. Natsuki shouted. Now let's get some ramen, to Ichiraku's. And with that Natsumi and Kushina were gone, dust trails following them out the door. Minato shook his head and pulled the other files back over to himself. Now that the twinge team was done, he could move on to the others. Kakashi and all the other Jonin had requested his daughters along with Sasuke Uchiha, and the council were adamant that the implanted Sharingan user should train the last true user. They would make a good frontline team with some hard-hitting teammates, but tradition dictated he get the highest scoring kunoichi and the lowest overall. He was sure Kakashi would enjoy the pair of fangirls. As for the others, the Ino Shikacho formation would be recreated, and he would need a sensei for them, but the others. He settled down for a long day of matching up the fresh ninja graduates. The next day was the team assignments, and Naruto was once again sat at the back of the class with Shino, Shikamaru, and Choji having yet to arrive. The pair of them were talking about their teammates, or possible ones at this stage. Neither particularly wanted to work with Sasuke, and they were currently discussing Kiba, or rather insulting Kiba. He is not a person I would want to work with. Why, you ask? Shino stated. He is loud and attempts to be a dominating presence. He does not understand the leader of the team is the Jonin sensei, not whoever is strongest. I think he'd give up pretty soon, if the Jonin was willing to beat some sense into him, Naruto replied. It wouldn't exactly be difficult at their level. Troublesome, Shikamaru interjected lazily, he and Choji having just strolled into the classroom together. That would affect the team dynamic, and Kiba would try again and again. You know what he's like. Perhaps, Naruto responded, a thoughtful look on his face. But you can't deny he'd push himself to get stronger and be a useful member of the team. Choji went to agree with him, but their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sakura and Ino, the two of them bursting through the door together, shouting at each other that they were the one who would get to sit next to Sasuke. Unfortunately for them, many of Sasuke's other fangirls had already arrived and were quite happy to contest this statement at the top of their lungs and, as the argument started to get heated, with their fists. It took Iruka-sensei's arrival and use of one of his special classroom control jutsus to quieten the class down and get everyone in their seats, Sakura managing to take the one next to Sasuke. Right, Iruka-sensei said. Now that you've all calmed down, I'll be reading out the team assignments. Team 1, led by Kushina Uzumaki, will be Natsuki Uzumaki, Natsumi Uzumaki. With that sentence, almost most of the boys in the class were on the edge of their seats, desperately hoping to be on the same team as their idols, and led by their mother. For many of them, it was one of their fantasies. The twins, however, had a slight smirk on their faces at the sight of their fanboys' pleading faces. Iruka merely chuckled to himself and let the tension build a little higher. And Naruto. The class exploded into noise, the fanboys all complaining that it was unfair and that they should be the one to fill out the last spot on their idol's team. Naruto, however, was in thought. Had they finally remembered him? Were they going to apologize and beg for him to come home? But if they had remembered him, surely he would have been called out as Naruto Uzumaki, rather than just Naruto. It would have been easier if he had given himself a new surname when he joined the academy, but he hadn't wanted to cut ties as finally as changing his name, rather than just hiding it. He'd wait, like he always did. If they said anything, he would reveal himself, but if they didn't, he wouldn't make the first move. He tuned back into Iruka-sensei's speech just in time to hear Sasuke's team mates declared as Sakura, as the kunoichi of the year, and Ami, who had carefully managed her grades to be the dead last of the class. Again, the class exploded into noise, this time female, each of them claiming they were the kunoichi of the year or the dead last, and that Iruka had scored them wrong. They must be the one on Sasuke's team. Naruto was fairly sure he was the only one to notice the tightening of Sasuke's face as the fangirls screamed about him. Quiet. Iruka-sensei shouted, having obviously reached the end of his patience. These decisions are final, having been made by the Hokage. That's Team 7. Team 8 will be Shino Aburame, Hiba Inuzuka, and Hinata Hyuga under Jonin-sensei Kurenai Yuhi. Naruto's head jerked up at that, recognizing the name from some of the Genjutsu scrolls he had read, whilst Shino slumped in his seat, his face showing the signs of annoyance only his friends or clan members would be able to pick up. "Oh, fuck," Shino muttered from behind his high collar. And finally, Iruka-sensei continued, unknowing of Shino's discomfort. Team 10 will be Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akimichi, and Ino Yamanaka with Asuma Sarutobi as their Jonin-sensei. All of your senseis should be here shortly, and I look forward to seeing your career's progress. It was only a few minutes later that the Jonin-senseis did arrive, led in by Kushina Uzumaki, her long red hair spilling down the back of the flak jacket that was covering the rest of the standard Konoha Jonin uniform. His eye immediately went to the one person not wearing the standard uniform, a dark-haired woman who seemed to wearing a dress made of bandages. As the only other woman amongst the senseis, she had to be Kurenai Yui. Maybe he could get Shino to introduce him to her and get her to teach him some of her Genjutsu. He doubted any of those on her team would want to specialize in them. "Okay, Team 1, you're with me," Kushina called out. "Hi, Oka-sensei," the twins replied, giggling and giving her a mocking salute. The three of them followed her out, Natsuki almost bouncing off the walls whilst Natsumi was only a little calmer. "We'll be going to our usual training ground, and from there I'll give you your actual Genin test," Kushina said. "What do you mean actual Genin test?" Natsuki shouted, outrage written across her face. "We've already passed the Genin test." "No, you haven't," Kushina replied, an obvious smile on her face, like she knew some kind of hidden secret. "And I'll let you know that 66% of people will fail." "That's completely unfair," Natsumi shrieked. "We worked really hard to pass the exam. You can't make us do another." "If I may, where are we going, sensei?" Naruto interjected, having noted they seemed to have forgotten about him. "Oh," Kushina said, with a slight blush of embarrassment. "I forgot about you, Naruto-kun. I'd better introduce myself. I'm Kushina Uzumaki, mother of these two horrors, and your new sensei. And as for where we going? We were going to our private training ground, but it's seal protected and you wouldn't be able to enter, so we will have to use a standard one." Naruto sighed. It seemed like none of them remembered him, but he didn't want to believe that just yet. "May I ask why I was chosen for this team, sensei?" "You have the complete opposite skill set to us, which means you can cover any of our weaknesses, and we can cover yours." Naruto twitched. He had worked for years to his family that he could be strong by using the exact opposite ninja arts to them, and here he was, their long-lost brother on their team, and they hadn't even noticed. Great. Okay. Thank you, Uzumaki-sensei. Don't call me that. It's so formal, and it makes me sound old. Just Kushina-sensei. Hi, Uzumaki-sensei. He replied. Kushina-sensei, Databane. We're at the training grounds. Good, she huffed, a pout on her face. Uzumaki-sensei. Naruto almost smiled upon seeing her face. She looked like an annoyed child who had finished her sweets and no one would give her more. His sisters, however, were looking on with amazement. Awesome. You've got to teach us how to annoy Oka-san like that. Natsumi set a grin on her face. Naruto smiled as he walked past her. Hi, Uzumaki-san. He could feel the glare on the back of his head as he said that, but it was highly satisfying to do so. Right, Kushina said, as she spanned a halt in the middle of the training ground. I know the girls, but we don't know you too well, so everyone introduced themselves. I'm Kushina Uzumaki. I like pranks, ramen, my daughters and my husband. I dislike traitors and men in swirly masks, and my ambition is to be a stronger kunoichi than Tsunade of the Sannin. You're next, Natsumi-chan. Hi, Oka-san. I'm Natsumi Uzumaki. I like my family, ramen, and reading. I dislike fanboys, and my dream is to be a better ninja than my two-san. Kushina pouted at this, and Natsumi rushed to assure her that she still thought she was awesome as well. Anyway, I'm Natsuki Uzumaki. I also like my family, ramen, and pulling pranks. I dislike reading. Natsumi stuck her tongue out at her sister at that. And I also want to be a stronger ninja than Two-san and Ka-san. Okay, Naruto said. I guess it's my turn. I'm Naruto. I like training and my friends. I dislike people who don't take being a ninja seriously, and my dream is to prove to my parents that I can still be an excellent ninja. I thought you were an orphan, Natsuki said rather bluntly, Kushina and Natsumi wincing at it. Doesn't mean I can't. I prove it to them, wherever they are. Right, Kushina said, hoping to defuse a possible argument. Now we'll go on to the Genin test. We'll be fighting each other, you three against me, and if you impress me, you pass. Not too difficult, is it? She disappeared with a puff of smoke and with a smile on her face. Just you wait, Oka-san, Natsuki shouted. We'll kick your ass. Let's go, Natsumi. Wait. Naruto said, as the twins ran over to where Kushina was waiting for them. We should make a plan. They ignored him and kept running, summoning a pair of clones each as they went. Naruto stared at their retreating backs. It was obvious to him who was the brains of this outfit. Oh, for all the Kami's sakes, he muttered and ran after them. The six of them, Naruto having lost which one was the original, had engaged Kushina in Taijutsu, and he doubted he would get a clear shot on her as she dodged and countered the clones arrayed around her. He could ensnare her in some Genjutsu, which would hopefully make it easier for the twins. He reached out with his chakra and looped it around hers, then began making hand seals. Demonic illusion, false surroundings. Another set of hand seals followed as he layered another false surroundings jutsu, followed by a dead layer, one that felt like a Genjutsu but didn't actually do anything, then began the combo again. He was just starting on the fifth layer when Kushina broke the first, and he quickly finished it. Whilst he could only keep 5 layers going at one time, he could create a 6th if the first was broken and a 7th if the second collapsed. He was glad she wasn't trying too hard. She was a jonin after all, and he didn't doubt she could break all the layers in one go if she wanted to. Kushina watched as her twins approached her. It was fairly obvious which of the 6 were the 4 clones. The twins hadn't even tried to hide their creation, and this was their tactic every time the 3 of them sparred. She ducked under the first Natsumi's punch and went to counter it by taking her legs out, which would hold up all the ones behind it, but it was blocked by the second Natsumi clone, whilst the first Natsuki clone attacked her. She moved away and let them surround her. She wasn't particularly worried. Her kids were good, but they weren't her level. She blocked a kick and used the leg to throw her into one of the others, before ducking a punch and lashing out, catching a Natsumi in the stomach, the lack of smoke showing her it was the real one. She spun and caught one of the other Natsumis in the face, dispelling it, before blocking a punch from one of the Natsukis and scything her feet out from underneath her. She wondered where their teammate was and quickly spotted him a short way behind the twins running through a set of hand seals. She didn't know what they were for, but she had read his file, and it would probably be a Genjutsu of some kind. She was proven right when the world shuddered and then shifted 5 feet to its left. It was only a minor Genjutsu, but in a fight it could be lethal, although on an opponent of her level it wouldn't be particularly effective. She let her ears take over and began ignoring the images in front of her. The sound of a sleeve rustling allowing her to block a punch and ducking a kick as it whistled through the air. She quickly broke it by gathering her chakra and stopping its flow momentarily, something she would have been hard-pressed to do as a child thanks to the Kyuubi her daughters now held. She watched as the world shifted back, and then further back, now 5 feet to the right of its original position. So he knew how to layer Genjutsu, did he? That was difficult. It required a fair amount of control, but also quite large reserves, something most Genjutsu specialists didn't have. She broke this illusion and everything shifted back to its original places, but it still felt like a Genjutsu, so she broke it before whatever would happen could set in. Then the world shifted again, this time back to the left, which was quickly broken, then the right again. Now she was getting annoyed. She was still fighting her daughters, but she was doing much worse than normal thanks to their teammate. Minato was right. He would be a good support teammate. She broke through 3 more illusions before spinning and lashing out at one of the illusions of Natsumi. She caught her in the throat, and the kunai she was holding tore it out, the blood spurting everywhere, going all over Kushina, some of the other clones and the ground between them. Kushina narrowed her eyes. There was no smell of blood, and she didn't remember drawing a kunai, so she gathered her chakra, pulled it in, and then released it. The world flickered back and forth quickly as she broke through all of the remaining illusions, and she was glad to see her daughter's corpse vanish, although the puff of smoke indicated she had hit something. She created a clone and substituted out with it. It was time to test Naruto properly, and if he happened to get a little banged up, he shouldn't have used demonic illusion, hell viewing. Whilst it would stop most Genin and Chunin, it just made Jonin pissed. Most of them had lost too many comrades, and the sight of them killing another never made them happy. She moved towards him, throwing a set of kunai in a denial pattern to prevent him from fleeing. She felt a little strange as she did so, like it was somehow wrong, but put it out of her mind as he rolled out of the way. She was just concerned about hurting one of her potential students, that was all, right? Naruto watched as Kushina kept dodging the twins' attacks, even though she was under the effects of his illusions. His hands were constantly in motion, trying to add yet another layer as she broke through them again and again. Then he felt her chakra pulse down the link, and seconds later her chakra burst out. The link down which he was layering Genjutsu severed instantly, and the illusions he still had up shattering. He was about to begin again when he heard several kunai whistling through the air. He dived out of the way as they impacted the ground and saw Kushina charging at him from the other side of the training ground. He looked back at the group still fighting and saw she was still there as well. Whatever technique it is that the twins are using to make solid clones, he thought to himself glumly. Of course their mother would know it too. He quickly drew a handful of Senbon from his pouch and threw them at her vital points, but she easily batted them away before engaging him in Taijutsu. He dodged one blow, deflected another, and went to counter, only to have to substitute out to avoid a kick that almost took his head off. He threw another set of Senbon, but these two were knocked out of the way. Again he dodged the punch, dodging the second one as well, and deflected the kick, but his weak counter was again blocked, and only another substitution saved him from a strike to the stomach. The academy style, he mused, wasn't very good at combat, mainly being used to teach the basics used in all styles to a student. Neither Shino, Choji nor Shikamaru used it, each of them preferring their clan styles, but Naruto didn't have any other style to use. Oh, he was good at it all right, if a bit mechanical, but it wasn't good enough. And whilst he wanted to use only the ninja arts his parents didn't, Taijutsu was a fairly critical area for a ninja. He made a mental note to try and find another style, or maybe a teacher. His musings were cut short by finding Kushina had a solid grip on his arm, preventing him from switching out, and as he had no way to block or avoid her incoming fist, prepared himself for unconsciousness. He awoke a few minutes later to see Natsumi and Natsuki tied back to back with each other and bickering, whilst Kushina standing over the three of them, a glare on her face. "Quiet," she shouted. "You finished the Genin test, and I have to say, girls, I'm a little disappointed in you. I'm sure your father and I taught you better than to just rush in. You passed." She paused to let them cheer whilst Naruto smiled happily, but only because Naruto was able to weave his strategy around yours. I heard him shout that the three of you should make a plan, but you did ignored him and ran in. It's not just you two now. The four of us are a team, Team Kushina. That sounds lame, Oka-san, Natsumi deadpanned. Yeah, her sister shouted. We should totally be Team Natsuki. No, Kushina shouted. We're Team Kushina. Team Natsumi is much better. Team Natsuki. Team Kushina. Team Natsumi. Naruto facepalmed. Sasuke was not in a good mood. The day had started so well, but it had all gone downhill when he got to the academy. First, he had been paired with Ami and Sakura, both of whom were some of his more adamant fangirls. Then his Jonin sensei had been ridiculously late, and it seemed that he would always be like that. The only bright spot he could find was that only one person on their team could pass the Genin test, and he was fairly sure that both of his teammates would be fairly useless in a fight, neither of them having worked hard at anything during the academy except trying to gain his attention. He kept walking and soon found himself entering the Uchiha district. He was greeted by his aunt and uncle, neither of them ninjas but shopkeepers instead, and gave them his first smile of the day in return. He continued walking, noting all the places where there used to be another member of his clan on patrol or a family working on their business. His fists clenched. This was his fault. He had killed dozens of his clan members and Sasuke would have his revenge on him, although he doubted he would grow strong on his current team and his teammates would be little help. He had to kill him, had to avenge his parents and dead clan members, but at the same time, they were Sasuke's clan members, and in a few years, either when he reached Jonin or Chunin at 18, he would be the clan head. The clan already looked at him for leadership, and some of their gazes were much like those of the villagers. But they didn't see him as the last great Uchiha, come to save them from the evil traitor. For them, he was Fugaku and Mikoto's son, the man who would become clan head and lead them out of the dark times. He was already clan head in all but name. He was the one who did the paperwork, who authorized the repairs, and that was why the clan respected him, because he was already leading them out of the dark times. This was what he had betrayed, the clan that had raised him, the clan he had scorned and killed. But not Sasuke. This was his clan, and he would prove him wrong. He would lead the clan back to greatness, and kill him along the way. He would not amount to nothing. Team 1 passed. Kushina said, although the twins will need to learn to work with their teammate. Excellent, Minato commented from behind his desk. They were currently in his office listening to the Jonin sensei's report about their teams. He was pleased that they could work together even if it was a little difficult at first. He still had a little niggle about their teammate, but put it out of his mind. He doubted it was important. The next 3 teams had failed, and their senseis had given their recommendations as to what should happen with them, whilst Gunma was giving his report on Team 5 now. Fuki has minimal skills. She's another fangirl of Sasuke's, and on seeing how far Sakura was in the rankings, stopped bothering in the hope she would be dead last. All in all, she should be dropped from the program altogether. As for Hibachi, he's not the worst student there. He seems willing to learn and did at least try to work together, so I would recommend a placement in one of them guard/training platoons until next year, when he could fill out one of the new teams. Thank you, Gunma. I'll make a note of your suggestions. Now, Hate. I believe you were assigned Team 6. Hi, Hokage-sama. The team failed the test and contains some of the worst students I have ever seen. None of them have the drive to become ninja, nor are they willing to attempt any physical exercise cough. Both Akane and Saburo should be dropped from the program, and I can only grudgingly say that Mariko should repeat a year, cough as she might learn something. We'll see, Minato said. We'll skip Team 7 as Kakashi is yet to arrive. So Kurenai, how did Team 8 do? They work very well together, Hokage-sama. Although there is a little friction between Shino and Kiba, and Hinata does seem to be the object of Kiba's affection, but when it came for them to work together as a tracking team, they managed to put all of that aside. Definitely a pass, Hokage-sama. Good. Reito, how was Team 9? They failed, Hokage-sama, but they worked hard during the test. I'd advise Reiko go back to the academy for another year, while Yoshiro could be an excellent courier with the set of legs he's got on him. As for Takashi, a year in the guard/training platoon would hopefully make him more patient and give him a bit of experience. Okay then, Minato replied, making a few notes on their files. And finally Team 10, Asuma? Perfect teamwork, but it is an Ino Shikicho formation. What can you expect, Hokage-sama? Asuma stated with a shrug. They passed, even if Ino is lacking bit in individual skill. Right? I'll work out. He'll be going back to the academy and... He was interrupted by a puff of smoke and Kakashi's arrival in the room, his head buried in his book, as always. Sorry I'm late. I met a black cat on the way and how to take the long route to avoid walking under any ladders. Minato sighed. He knew that if it was critical Kakashi would be there, but his lateness was rather annoying at times. Okay, Kakashi, how did Team 7 do? I haven't tested them yet. Naruto woke up with a start, a leak in the roof causing some water to drop on his face. It was the day after the Genin test, and he was still running on a mixture of satisfaction and disappointment. Satisfaction that he managed to pass and made a decent showing of himself, and disappointment that he couldn't do better, and that they hadn't remembered him. He had wanted them to remember him for so long. It had been one of his driving influences to become a ninja, and just when he thought that they had remembered him, it turned out to be a cruel joke of fate. In distancing himself from them and using everything they did not, he had become the perfect member of the team, expected to be the closest person to them outside of their family. But he had thought he'd be angrier than he was. All he really felt was annoyance and irritation, not the cold rage he wanted to feel. He wanted to be angry at them for pulling his leg, but he couldn't. He knew he hadn't really worried about them much lately, or indeed much within the last few months, maybe years. Could this have caused his want, his need, to become part of his family again, to become just a habit? He wasn't going to announce it to them, though. He had made his mind up about that years ago. He would wait and watch, just as he always had done. He had always been patient, and he was willing to be more so. Pushing the thoughts of his family out of his mind, he turned his attention to something that had been worrying him since the test. His taijutsu was pathetic. That was all he could say, really. Given his position in the class rankings with it, he hadn't thought it would be that bad. Although thinking about it, anyone higher than him in the rankings used clan styles. Even Shino, whose bug-style taijutsu was completely logic-based. Thinking of Shino, he had agreed to meet up with him and the rest of his friends to get some lunch and talk about their teams. If Shino's sensei was the woman he thought she was, he would much prefer to be on her team, somewhere where he might actually learn something. Before that, though, was the team's meeting for today, Kushina wanting them to meet up in the mornings for missions and training. He had rather enjoyed needling her, however, and had been wondering how far he could push her before she snapped. It might be childish, but he was a child and was allowed to act like one at times, and would serve her right for forgetting about him. Sighing, he pulled himself out of bed. He pulled on his clothes and looked at his jacket with an appraising eye. It was getting a little small now, but all the patches and letting out he had done to it had kept it in working condition far longer than he expected. Even so, he would have to get a new one sooner or later, and hopefully D-Ranks will net him enough money to pay for a new one, along with some proper ninja tools. He wandered into the kitchen hoping a decent breakfast would take his mind off of his financial situation. Pulling open one of the cupboards, he unwrapped some meat from a rabbit that he had caught the day before, From the paper it had been covered with before lighting his basic fire pit, with a small camping jutsu the academy had taught. As he ate his breakfast, he turned his problem over in his head. He needed to cover his weaknesses and Kushina would be able to help him, but he doubted she would, as teaching him Uzumaki clan nin or taijutsu was out of the question if he wasn't a known member. She could hand him off to another sensei, but he doubted that was his style. He had already learned everything the library held at academy level, so there wouldn't be anything new there. But he wasn't academy level now, was he? He was a genin, he ninja license allowing him to practice higher level jutsu now that he had the clearance for them. Whilst he doubted there would be too much to learn in depth, there would be plenty of breadth, and that was what he needed right now. He would check it out later, however, as first he had to meet up with his unknowing family. He arrived at Training Ground 4, Kushina seemingly claiming it as their teams, before the rest of his family, and wandered over to a tree, then sat down and began to take in the training ground. It wasn't the largest of training grounds, that honor belonging to number 44, reputed to be a forest 10 kilometers across, but it still had some varied terrain. Like all of Konoha's training grounds, there was a large forested patch covering about a third of the grounds, whilst a small lake covered another section, as well as spilling over into Training Ground 5. It was at the edge of this forest that Naruto was sat. He guessed he was about 5 or 10 minutes early, but the sounds he could hear proved that it didn't matter, the rest of his team arriving in a large argument. He listened in, then sighed to himself. Really? Ramen for breakfast? Was the fact that Kushina took the last of it a good enough reason to wake up the entirety of the village with their arguments? Morning, Naruto. Kushina shouted, the twins joining in a little half-heartedly, still glaring at Kushina's back. Right, you three, here's the schedule for today. We'll start with a quick D rank, then come back here for some team training. I give you a short break for lunch before we start on the individual training, then we'll finish with another D rank. Is that understood? Hi, Kushina-sensei, the twins chorused. Hi, Uzumaki-sensei. She gave him a brief glare before spinning on her heel and pointing dramatically back the way they had came. To the Hokage Tower. They had been waiting outside the mission office for a few minutes before they were called in, the Chunin team that had just left looking none too happy about their mission. The four of them filed in to see the Hokage sat behind his desk signing off on paperwork, whilst Iryōjutsu was handling mission scrolls, and the Hokage was carrying a pile of paperwork out the door just as the Hokage carried another set in. Naruto blinked before realizing they were probably shadow clones. Was there anyone in his family that didn't use them? Team Kushina reporting for duty, Hokage-kun, Kushina said as the three genin lined up in front of her, and requesting our first mission. I thought we agreed on Team Natsumi, Natsumi said, glaring at her mother. No, it was Team Natsuki, her sister shouted, the three of them squaring off against each other. Naruto facepalmed. Team 1 reporting Hokage-sama, he said, as his sisters blinked and then lined back up again, looking slightly embarrassed, requesting a D-rank mission. Hell no, Natsuki shouted. We want an A rank. Yeah, Natsumi yelled, supporting her sister. We can easily do a mission like that. Bakas, Kushina shouted, before smacking the two of them on the head. You're fresh genin, and you'll take what missions I tell you. We don't need you to coddle us, old lady. Natsumi shouted. Old lady? I'll give you old lady. Kushina screamed, before lashing out towards her daughters, both of whom took the opportunity to jump on her. Naruto sighed and sidled over to where the Hokage was sat, avoiding the small brawl that was going on. The Hokage himself was looking on with a long-suffering expression on his face, and he and Naruto shared a glance before rolling their eyes. Are they like this all the time, Hokage-sama? Unfortunately, yes, he replied, but you'll get used to it soon enough. Seeing as the rest of your team is busy, do you want to pick the D rank you'll be doing? Okay, what choices have we got? Dog walking, babysitting, litter picking, house moving. We'll take the litter picking, Naruto interjected. But are all D ranks like this? And how many do you have? D ranks are specified as in-village civilian-related missions. Even if I asked you to do something as menial as picking up my lunch, it would be a C rank as it had been issued by a military source. So in answer to your question, yes, they are all like that, civilians paying us to do things they don't want to. As for how many, he beckoned Naruto closer to the desk so that he could see past the small pile of D-rank scrolls on his desk to the even larger piles of D-rank mission scrolls behind it. We have lots of civilians and many of them submit D-ranks, so there's always a constant supply of them. Chunin and some of the ninjas who are coming to the end of their active careers will do these all day as there is very little risk, and they pay a decent amount if you do enough. You'll be able to do them on your own in a few months if you need the extra money. As for any leftover, we get Guy to agree to a challenge, then make him do them. He's surprisingly efficient. Their conversation was interrupted by Kushina, who looked the picture of health, while both the twins were a little bruised. Right, Team Kushina requesting a D-rank Hokage-kun, she said. He gestured toward Naruto, who held up their mission scroll, a faint smile on his face. Team 1 has already been issued with a D rank. It was given to the responsible adult on your team. Kushina blushed in embarrassment before hurrying to the door. We'd better go and complete it then, hadn't we? Minato stared at the male member of his wife and daughter's team. He didn't know why, but he felt so familiar to him. He had told him how and why D ranks were classified the way they were, had seen the same expression when dealing with his family on his face, the same face he saw in the mirror every day. But it was nothing. He should get back to the paperwork. There it was again, his mind pushing itself away from the subject and onto other things. He didn't know why he was affected like this, and he really should get back to the paperwork. Again, almost Genjutsu, but mostly not, and if it affected others. Paperwork on the budgetary increases due to the upcoming Chunin exam, he should really give that his full attention. It didn't take them long to reach the location for their mission, one of Konoha's many small parks, while roof hopping, even if the twins were grumbling the whole way. Why'd you have to choose litter-picking Naruto? Natsuki asked. It's going to be really boring and take ages with just the four of us. He rolled his eyes at the question. Everyone knew that the Yondaime was one of the most intelligent people ever to live, but it would seem that his daughters hadn't inherited that. It's not going to be just the four of us, Uzumaki-san. Or have you forgotten your favorite jutsu? She stared at him blankly. Shadow clones. Natsumi asked weakly. Hi. I don't know how many you can make, but I know it is at least 2 apiece, and as this is not a combat situation, you will be able to stretch that number further, allowing us to complete this mission in a very short amount of time. Did you plan all that out when you picked it? Natsuki asked wide-eyed. You only had a few minutes. Nevertheless, it is the best plan for this mission, Kushina said, a small smile on her face. So get to it, you three. Aren't you going to help us, Oka-san? Natsumi asked, seeing Kushina take a seat on one of the benches. Nope, I'll be supervising your progress. The twins glared at her, and Naruto sighed. He got the feeling that this would be happening quite often. He watched them carefully as they summoned a dozen clones each. Both were using a single cross-shaped hand seal, not one he had come across before, and as long as there weren't any others, it shouldn't be too hard to learn. And learn it he would. The ability to be in multiple places would allow him to cast multiple Genjutsu upon a single target. If he could layer 5, then he and a clone would be able to layer 10, and 2 of them would allow 15. He wasn't sure how many clones he would be able to make, and whilst Jonin would be able to bring all of them down in a single go, against Jinin and Low Chunin, they would never be able to escape his illusions. He started when Natsumi called his name, but quickly got to work. With the amount of people they had, it should take long for the 25 of them to clear all the litter. Less than an hour later, they were back at Training Ground 4. When the Hokage had said that enough of them paid a decent amount, he must have meant 9 to 5 constant D ranks. The pay was minimal, to say the least. The twins had spent the rest of the time talking about how much ramen they were going to buy with their pay. Didn't they have anything else to spend it on? His jacket would last a little longer until he needed a new one, and he had a decent amount of straightish Senbon. He could wait a few days and have enough to buy some decent kunai, but these were useful items to buy, not work out that they could get 30 bowls of miso ramen. He really wished he was on Shino's team. He didn't know how much longer he could stand them talking on and on and on about ramen. Right, Kushina said, pulling him out of his thoughts. This is our first group training session, so we'll go over what you did wrong on the test and how to do it right. You were facing a single superior foe on open ground with the only objective of killing them. Any thoughts? Charge, Natsuki shouted, pumping her fist in the air. Her mother laughed. Details Natsuki-chan. Well, Natsumi started, nibbling on her lip. Natsuki and I work well together, and we just need to bring Naruto into our existing strategies, right? Right, Kushina confirmed. So Natsuki and I fall back to set traps in the woods while Naruto delays you. As you are more powerful than him, you would have driven him back, and he can use this to lure you into our traps. Then all three of us ambush you and take you out. Yeah, Natsuki added, what she said. Okay, good, Kushina said. Now what if you had to defend a single VIP from a single superior foe on open ground? Me and Natsumi take the foe while Naruto moves the VIP to a safe place. Natsuki said, her brow scrunched up in concentration. Then when they're safe, we run away. It would be better if one of you defended the VIP, Naruto interjected. We don't know that they won't be ambushed while I move them, and I would be unable to defend adequately on my own. If both of you have similar skills, then Natsuki and I would delay the foe whilst Natsumi moved the VIP. She thinks better tactically and would be able to adapt if the scenario changes. Excellent, Kushina said. If we go back to the first scenario, you were unable to lure the foe and Naruto was injured whilst doing so, minor injuries, so he's still able to fight. Well, I can still use Genjutsu, Naruto started, the girl still thinking, so if I. Team 1 had broken up for lunch and Naruto was heading to the rooftop, where he, Shino, Choji, and Shikamaru would cloud watch to discuss their first day with their teams. The girls had invited him to join them for ramen, but after hearing them go on about it all day, he didn't think he would be able to stand the sight of the stuff. Besides, Choji was bringing food, and the Akimichi's cooking was always good. Not to mention that he didn't want to spend too much time with his family. It took him only a few minutes to get to their meeting spot, his friends waiting for him. Choji was staring at the food he bought, trying his hardest not to start from the looks of the drooling. Shikamaru was lying on his back watching the clouds while Shino was watching him approach, sat in the shadows. It is good to see you, Naruto, Shino started. Why, you ask? I am unable to put up with Kiba anymore at the present time. He has challenged Kurenai-sensei repeatedly in an attempt to impress Hinata-san. He has only been successful at grating on my nerves. I'm not surprised, Shikamaru snorted as he accepted the food Choji was handing out. All of us have issues with our teammates. Ino is loud and abrasive as is Kiba. I thought you'd get on with your teammates better though, Naruto. Just be glad you aren't Sasuke. They all winced. Sakura was just as loud as Ino but lacking in a physical skill and still pined away for Sasuke, while Ami was a cunning backstabbing fangirl willing to do anything to be with Sasuke. True, Naruto said, but all the Uzumakis? They aren't much better. All I have heard today is ramen, ramen, ramen. Although Natsumi is more intelligent than I thought, either that is Natsuki is less. I thought they'd be more the same. Sensei is capable annoyingly. I doubt I'll be able to transfer off the team without a better reason. It wasn't like he could storm up to his Oda-san and demand to be taken off of his sister's and Ka-san's team after all. I'm fine with my team, Choji stated. I learned to tune Ino out long ago, and Asuma-sensei is pretty laid back. Why do you hate your team so much anyway, Naruto? Shikamaru asked, a calculating look on his face. He could give no answer to that. They left off discussing their teams after that, and just relaxed. Choji and Shikamaru had both been congratulated by their parents for getting on a team with Ino, even though Shikamaru knew that had nothing to do with their grades. It wasn't long after that Ino stormed up and dragged the two of them off for training, muttering something about not letting Sakura and Ami getting too far ahead of her. He and Shino talked a little longer, but split soon after, both heading back to their teams. A few minutes' walk found him back at the training ground, and with the rest of his team nowhere in sight, he took a seat under one of the trees, scooping a handful of leaves up and sticking them all over his body. It was a fairly simple chakra control exercise for him now, but the practice was always useful, even if it was some way below the level his was on at the moment. He didn't know how long he had been concentrating on the leaves, but he doubted it had been more than a few minutes when Natsuki shook him out of his meditation. He opened his eyes to see the rest of his team gathered around him, although it seemed to have gotten larger. He didn't know his mother had sisters. He shook his head and refocused, slightly embarrassed that he had mistaken his mother's clones for different people, and tuned into their conversation. Right, Kushina started. Now we're all back from lunch while having our individual training. Each of you will work with one of my clones, and when you go home think on what you have learned and how to apply it in group training, okay? You take Natsuki over there while you take Natsumi over there, and I'll train Naruto here. Then we'll go do another D-rank in a few hours. Naruto watched as the others split up, leaving him and Kushina alone as he rose to his feet, listening as Kushina continued speaking. Naruto, as you're not a member of the Uzumaki clan, I can't teach you any of our clan techniques that the girls use. However, even if I could, I wouldn't, as they don't suit the style of fighting you use. What I have noticed is that Taijutsu is somewhat lacking. Whilst it is a good use of the academy style itself is only meant as a base to build upon, understand? Hi, Sensei. So rather than starting you on a whole new style straight away, I'm going to teach you the armed academy style. This allows the use of the academy style with weapons like shuriken and kunai that you are likely to have on you at all times, as well as more specialist weapons, such as Senbon or a tanto. Larger weapons can be used, but will prevent you from using many of the movements in the style and are better used in their own specialist styles. If it's the armed academy style, why is it not taught at the academy sensei? It requires a high degree of proficiency in the standard style, something only you qualify for in your class, as most others use a specific clan style. When it was taught at the academy, there were an increasing number of injuries as those who are unskilled at the standard style used the same moves and ended up stabbing themselves, as they had not preformed it correctly. Now, you primarily use Senbon, but I'll teach you how to use kunai and shuriken with it as well. You need to be aware of the changed positions of your hands, so take a forward stance with a kunai in each hand. No, hold them slightly more apart. You've got a greater reach now. Yes, that's it. Now step, and that's it. Now the other side. Team 1 continued on like this for a few days, D-ranks in the morning and evening, whilst training over lunch. Naruto had found himself rather enjoying it, surprisingly, and was still unsure if that was a good thing. His family hadn't remembered him, but he was closer to them than he had been in a long time, perhaps ever. Natsuki and Kushina were easy to tease, with Natsumi not far behind them. None of them seemed to get it all of them time, and he imagined that he was more like Minato than he first thought. Either way, he was still staring at his sisters and mother as they once again were fighting in the Hokage office. The girls thought they were ready for a C rank, and Kushina had surprisingly agreed. How this had caused them to fight, he wasn't too sure. Maybe it was genetic. He turned to the Hokage as he handed over the mission scroll. Naruto have long been established as the only one on their team who could restrain themselves. The C rank is a courier mission, Minato said as he handed a scroll to Naruto. To deliver this letter to Kazuhiro Shicho, the dockmaster in the port of Takanami. Shouldn't be any danger other than bandits, but you'll be moving fast enough that they shouldn't bother you. Off you go. And can you ask my secretary to send in the cleaner again? Tell her I need a Kushina cleaning crew. she'll know what you mean. Should hope so, Naruto muttered, half to himself. This is the third time I've had to do this. Minato smiled. I don't think it'll be the last either. Half an hour later, the four of them were heading through the trees at a decent clip. It wasn't their top speed, they would wear out too quickly that way, but it was long measured strides that they could keep up for hours on end. Ninjas were much faster than civilians, and what would take them a week or so could be done in a day. There was good reason why the best messengers were courier ninjas. Even so, they would have to travel a fair distance before they got to Takanami, enough that they would have to stop the night there before heading back. Hopefully, they would be able to find a hotel in the port, but if not, they still had their tents, and it would take only a few minutes' work to pitch them. Naruto was currently trying to ignore his family. Once again, another argument had started, this time about the ease of the mission and how they were awesome enough to get a higher rank. Naruto, he started, bad form for a ninja, and turned his attention to his team. Hi, Uzumaki-sensei. Kushina pouted at him, looking remarkably childish for a jonin, before continuing, back me up on this being an appropriate mission for your level. After all, you are the responsible adult. He felt it too. Oh, he may not be the one teaching them, but the three women could do nothing but needle each other and occasionally fight. It was nothing serious, even he could see that, but he still didn't join in, no matter how many openings they left for him. We have done 8 D ranks, he began, pushing off from another tree as he did so. The next logical step would be a single C rank. Then when we've done multiple C ranks, a single B rank, and so on. Not D ranks, then SSS ranked Black Op missions. Natsuki rubbed the back of her head bashfully. Well, I didn't expect those straight off the bat. Naruto sighed. Yes, Uzumaki-san, you did. Letter to be delivered to you. Natsumi said to a rather stout middle-aged man who had introduced himself as Kazuhiro Shicho, the dockmaster. Can you sign here and here to confirm delivery of the letter? Then we'll be on our way. They had arrived late at Takanami and were told that the dockmaster would not be available until the next day, so the four of them had taken a pair of rooms at a nearby hotel. They had woken early the next day and met with the dockmaster, who seemed rather disgruntled over something. Naruto decided to call him out on it. Information was important to a ninja, and something that bugged a man like this wasn't going to be small. Something seems to be the matter, Shicho-san. Is it anything we can help with? No, lad. He gestured out towards one of the ships in the Habor. See that ship? That's Shio no Hokori, one of Gato Company's many transport ships. Anytime they drop anchor and let their crews have shore leave, they end up causing all sorts of havoc. Last time they burnt down one of the bars in the town. Before that, it was accusations of attempted rape from some of the women. Nothing but trouble, Gato is, but he's the best transporter in the world and his company is everywhere, so you can't get away from him. Anyway, I'll let you go. I'm sure you've more important places to be than here, but thank you for delivering this letter. After that, their schedule went back to normal for a few days, D ranks and training, whilst Naruto kept begging off any other meetings with them, still not wanting to spend time with them if they weren't going to bother to remember him. He had gotten the hang of the armed academy style and only had his lack of experience with it to blame for any problems he had. He rather enjoyed the precision it gave him while he was using Senbon, not to mention the ability to administer poisons directly to the enemy's body. His accuracy was excellent as always, even if his only opportunity to use it had been on Tora, a paralyzing toxin on the tips of them, making it one of the quickest captures on record. The quickest still belonged to the Hokage himself, but most people agreed that use of Hiraishin was cheating. He had learned a few more sealing components and started on a basic storage seal design, an activate component followed by an entrance/exit, then a looped stasis pair, and finally a storage component between the two stasis ones. The theory was that your chakra would travel in a straight line through each component, Without the activate, you wouldn't be able to turn the seal on or off, as it were. The entrance/exit would be where the object was put into the storage component, and the looped stasis pair would ensure that your chakra kept the stasis on continuously. Of course, the chakra would eventually run out if it wasn't recharged, at which point whatever it was that was held would start aging again. The better the control over your chakra, the less you could put in to activate the seal, and the harder it would then be to detect, but it would run out that much sooner. This was the reason seals like this weren't used to store food everywhere. Oh, they were okay for strong ninja, but civilians? A refrigerator may be more expensive and less efficient in the short term, but all they need was electricity, not a rather large supply of chakra. It was one of these that held his lunch for today. He had a few smaller, simpler ones to store excess Senbon and other non-perishables. They lacked the looped stasis pair, but they wouldn't be a beacon on chakra if he was trying to hide. It wasn't particularly easier, but it was possible to detect the chakra used for continuously powered seals over that of ambient chakra, and, while unlikely that any below Jonin rank could do it, he didn't want to get into bad habits. His Genjutsu were as good as ever, although he was looking forward to trying them in a more terminal manner. Sparring with the girls was all well and good, but he could practice the ones designed to break an opponent's mind on them. That would be unprofessional, especially given how vulnerable Natsuki was to them. Case in point at the moment. He had been sparring with her for one of their training sessions, but now he, Natsumi, and Kushina were stood watching her bat around at thin air. She'd been at it for about 10 minutes already, and when the third tree was torn about, Kushina eventually took pity on her and released her. Natsuki, Kushina started, when her daughter had finally realized what was going on. I know that illusions are Naruto's specialty, but you really must pay more attention to your surroundings during a fight. You know that Naruto is going to use an illusion, and if you can't spot it when you know it's coming from him, how are you going to cope in a real fight when you wouldn't? I know, Oka-san, Natsuki replied, nibbling on her lower lip, but I get so involved in just a straight-up fight that I don't pay attention. And I swear I broke through all 4 illusions. There were 6, Uzumaki-san, Naruto interjected, the faintest glimmer of a mile on his face. She glared at him before turning back to her mother. Anyway, are we going to get a final mission for today? No, Kushina replied, a thoughtful look on her face. But I want all 3 of you here tomorrow equipped for a full combat mission. I think it's about time you saw the darker side of being a ninja firsthand. Team Kushina dismissed. Team Natsuki. Naruto sighed, then walked off. These arguments lasted for ages. The next day found the 4 of them sat in a circle in the training grounds, their backpacks beside them and a map on the floor, a rock pinning it down at each corner. Kushina had told them that a group of bandits had been raiding several trading caravans that traveled from the south of the country, near the Land of Waves, to Port Takanami, which was in the east, and had been the main trading port with the Land of Whirlpools. The bandits are somewhere in this section of forest, Kushina said, circling a small area on the map between them, close enough to the trade routes that it would be easy to raid them, but far enough away from the larger towns and cities that they are unlikely to be dealt with by any local militia. Our job is going to be to find these bandits and exterminate. Apparently, a minor noble in the area has taken offense to them. Do we know what kind of numbers we're dealing with? Natsumi asked, a thoughtful look on her face. The few reports we have say there are between 2 or 3 dozen bandits, Kushina replied. They've only been attacking small caravans, and none with any sort of guard, so it looks like a small, untrained group of men. Any other questions? Her 3 students shook their heads before standing up and pulling on their packs. A few last-minute checks of weaponry and equipment, and then the 4 of them were on the way to the east gate, still a little unsure of themselves. Naruto knew that he would have to kill people as a ninja. It was part of the job description, and whilst they had all been prepared for it at the academy and in training, it was not quite the same thing. In less than a week, he'd be back here, the blood of several men on his hands. Had they turned to banditry to feed their families, And would every kill cause a wife and child to sit at home waiting for a husband and father who would never return? Or were these men thugs, brutes who killed for no reason other than their own enjoyment, that the world would be grateful for their deaths? He put it out of his mind. Such were not the concern of a ninja, but a philosopher. They were being paid to go here and kill these men, for no other reason than they had been ordered to. For a ninja, you obeyed orders, obeyed your kage, for they were the conscience of the village. They made the hard decisions, gave the orders, the ninja just followed them. Naruto moved silently from one branch to another. Naruto was to circle around the camp, picking off any isolated bandits until he was discovered, at which Natsuki and Natsumi were to attack from the front, their flashy jutsu drawing any attention and causing the bandits to rush them, Naruto continuing to pick them off and preventing them from retreating. Kushina would be watching from a nearby vantage point, ready to step in if any of them froze up from their first kill or in the unlikely event they were overwhelmed, something that shouldn't happen given how much stronger genin were than normal militia. Spotting a man leaving the circle of firelight that the bandits' tents were camped about, Naruto moved silently until he was slightly behind him, then started casting his Genjutsu. It was only a minor one, enough to confuse his senses and make him walk a little further away from the camp than he intended, but it should stop anyone finding the body. He watched as the man moved to a nearby tree, lowered his trousers, and started to empty his bladder. Naruto rolled his eyes. He didn't doubt that this would only be the first of many bandits killed taking a piss, and slowly selected a Senbon with a quick-acting, lethal poison. He wasn't worried about the poison being detected in the man's bloodstream later. No one was going to care after all, and the more quick-acting the poison, the more detectable it was. He had lethal poisons, the ones he was using now, as well as paralysis toxins, hallucinogens, and various other plant and animal extract that would prevent an enemy from functioning properly. It wasn't a difficult shot, a stationary target illuminated by moonlight at short range, and in a way that made the shot harder. He was going to kill this man. His body would fall, and his corpse would cool because of Naruto's actions. All the worries he had before they had left came rushing back. Did he have a wife? Were there children waiting for their father to come home? He hardened his heart, steadied his stomach, and threw the Senbon, a pair aimed for his throat and liver. They both struck true, and the man quickly put his hands to them, and then started to open his mouth to scream. He didn't get time to, though, the poison surging through his veins causing him to stumble and collapse, dead within less than 10 seconds. Naruto stared at his body for a moment, safe up in his perch in the trees. Ninjas killed bandits and ninjas killed ninjas. Was he going to sit around and regret the life of one man? But what about 2 or 3 or however many he would kill over his ninja career? Were they any worse than this, other than the fact that this man would be first? No. He would take each mission as it came. Each kill would simply be that, a kill. He would trust in his kage, in his sensei, in his teammates, in his family. He would live each day as it came and have no regrets. His family may not have recognized him, but he didn't really care anymore. He was happy being their teammate. If they remembered him, so be it. If they didn't, so be it. He had no regrets. He was happy. 6 men later, and Naruto still hadn't been detected, although he doubted that would last much longer. He got in a pair of men who were asleep in one of the tents with the door open, and if someone looked in, it was unlikely they would realize they were actually dead. But 5 men had gone to use the trees as a toilet, and none of them had come back. Surely someone would get suspicious? He didn't think it was likely he'd get any more with this method. The last 23 were all grouped together, most of them playing cards by firelight, while the rest sat round and watched. He flared his chakra, the prearranged signal for Natsuki and Natsumi to attack, and prepped a handful of Senbon, taking care not to prick himself. He had antidotes, but there was not need to be hasty if there was no call for it. He watched as the rest of his team moved into position, 2 darker patches against the night. Both had taken off their orange skirts and jackets, having replaced them with the stereotypical long black trousers, taped down at the ankles, and a long-sleeved shirt with a mask and bandana. Naruto was still in his usual garb, having picked it for the fact it didn't really stand out anywhere, fields or forests, night or day. A few hand seals and whispered words later and shadow kunai were raining down across the bandits' camp. Most of them died within a few seconds of the barrage, quickly bleeding out if they hadn't already died, while Naruto dealt with any that looked like they might survive. It was short and brutal, only a few strained cries making their way past dying lips. They changed positions and watched for a few minutes, waiting to see if any had survived, before dropping down from the trees and checking the bodies and tents, the noble wanting to know why such uncouth men had settled down in his forest and raided on his lands. It wasn't until Natsumi found a scroll in a rather well-appointed tent that they had their answer. Raid any caravans traveling the route north. Free to do as you wish with any captives. Make it so no trader will take the land route. Gato. Gato again, eh? Kushina said, dropping down from her vantage point. If she'd been in the same place the whole time, Naruto was rather disappointed in himself that he didn't spot her, and walking over to them. If the traders found it unsafe to take the land route because of bandit raids, how else could they get their wares around? By sea, Natsumi replied, a frown on her face. And nearly all the sea routes are controlled by Gato. It's all about his profit margin. Many things are Natsumi, Kushina said, looking wearier than Naruto had ever seen her. But are all of you okay? This was your first kill after all. If you feel off, let me know. No, we feel fine, Oka-sensei. The girls started after a brief look at each other. It was just something we had to do. Same here, Naruto answered. Kushina-sensei. It was an odd few days after that. They were training and taking D ranks as normal, but Natsuki was a bit quieter and Natsumi a bit more withdrawn, but Kushina soon had them back to normal. Perhaps better than normal, given Naruto was joining in more. He had yet to join them for lunch, but he joined in the teasing, helping his sisters gang up on Kushina and poking the two of them with a deadpan remark, even if Natsuki didn't get half of them. It was this that prompted Kushina to get them another C rank, sure that they were ready to take another one, now that they had gotten over their first kill. She wasn't quite sure what to get them. They could handle a low C easily, but could she push them? Protection of a minor noble during a marriage omiai. No, Natsuki's not the most diplomatic of people. Hey. She does have a point, Natsuki-san, Naruto replied. Remember the babysitting mission? Those little brats totally deserved it. Still not supposed to hit small children, Nei-san, Natsumi added, a grin on her face. He groped me. Nothing to grope. I'm not flat-chested. Natsumi-san never said you were, Natsuki-san, Naruto added, wondering if he could get Natsuki face to match her hair. But you do seem to bring it up a lot. A little more teasing would have had her explode, crimson face and clenched white fists, obvious signs of an impending tantrum, but they were cut off by Kushina shouting out, the Hokage watching them with a content smile on his face. Right, we'll take this one, the escort mission to Wave. An escort to Wave? Naruto asked. What are the details, Kushina-sensei? The mission was issued by Tazuna, an architect who's building a bridge in Wave Country, to escort him back from to Konoha to Wave. He came to Konoha to hire a ninja squad to take him home again, Natsumi asked, a frown on her face. I don't see what the point of coming to Konoha was. You are also to guard the bridge until its completion to prevent bandit attacks, Minato replied, not taking his eyes of his paperwork. Although why he's worried about them, I'm not sure. What do you mean, Otis-san? The bridge is 80% complete and connects to the land of Waves directly where the village is. Any attacks on the bridge would have to come from the land of Waves through the village, and defending that would be more pressing than the bridge, Minato replied, pulling more sets of paper towards himself. Since there have been no reports of bandits attacking the village, we can assume there are no bandits already in the land of Waves, so that means he has a fear of pirates. But again, we've had no reports of pirate activity anywhere near Wave or the surrounding coastline. So Tazuna is probably hiding something, Kushina said. I don't know why he'd even bother. This is a ninja village with a good reputation. Indeed, and for that reason you are to give Tazuna assistance in whatever matter he is dealing with, in return for trade agreements or promises of future payment or service. You are not an inexperienced genin team anymore, and Kushi-chan you should be able to deal with most other threats. Hi, Hokage-sama, Team Kushina replied. The client is outside. I'll call him in so you know who he is, and then the mission's all yours, Minato said, signaling to one of the ANBU. Moments later the door opened and Tazuna walked in. He was an old man, with gray hair and a thick beard, a small pair of glasses perched on his nose. He also stank of alcohol, something all the ninja picked up on easily and wrinkled their noses at. These are my guards? He asked, looking over the three genin with an annoyed expression. They look super young. Are they really old enough to be ninjas? They don't look very good. Don't look very good. Are you sure they'll be able to protect me, Hokage-sama? Tazuna asked, ignoring Natsuki's mumbling. Of course we'll be able to protect you, Natsumi yelled as she started to stomp over to him, her sister at her side. Yeah, we're awesome ninjas, Natsuki added. Naruto sighed and grabbed them by the back of their collars, anchoring himself to the floor with chakra as he did so. Neither of them noticed they weren't moving forward, preferring to continue shouting at the bridge builder. Don't attack the client, he whispered. It's bad for business. But he called us short, Natsumi hissed, still glaring at Tazuna. And flat, Natsuki added. Both Naruto and Natsumi blinked and shared a look at each other before turning to stare at her. She blushed and failed to meet their gaze before continuing. I meant failures. Really? Naruto drawled as he turned back towards the Hokage, Natsumi desperately trying not to laugh. A few hours later and Team 1 were waiting by the east gate, although Kushina had yet to arrive with the client. It didn't take long for Kushina to arrive, pulling the partially drunk form of Tazuna behind her, a bottle still clutched in his hand. Right, she started. Everyone got their gear? We'll be on a month-long protection mission, so plenty of kunai and shuriken as well as trapping equipment. Naruto glanced at Natsumi and Natsuki, both of whom nodded firmly, before turning back to his sensei. Hi, he stated, we're ready. Okay, then we'll need a defensive formation, Tazuna in the center, Naruto at the front for reconnaissance, maybe some Genjutsu, and the girls at either side. I'll take the rear as I can react the fastest. Any complaints? Yeah, Natsumi muttered. That's my plan. No, Naruto replied, ignoring her. Then let's go, Kushina replied. Super, Tazuna added, before taking a swig from his bottle. No, Tazuna, Natsuki asked a while into their journey. Does the Land of Waves have any ninja? No, he replied. All we have is my soon-to-be super bridge. Most of the outlying countries don't have a ninja village, Naruto interjected. They're limited to the 5 major countries and the smaller ones that lie between them, Kusa and Aim and so on. That's right, Naruto, Kushina added. I see that, unlike my daughters, you actually learnt something from the academy. Kusa and Taki are between IWA and us, whilst Tani lies between us and Suna. You and Shimo lie between us and Kyumo, and my former homeland lies on the route to Kiri. Aim lies between 3 of the great villages, hence its repeated devastation in each shinobi war. Then are there villages between Suna and IWA, and so on? Natsumi asked. Yes, Kushina replied. They don't concern us unless they have allied with one of the larger villages. In fact, all of the largest shinobi conflicts began when one of the larger villages joined in on one of the endless battles that are fought between the smaller villages. Why do the smaller villages fight so much? Natsuki asked. I remember Irika-sensei mentioning it, but he didn't say why. It's due to economics. Thanks to our reputation and that of the other great villages, our income is fairly secure, but there are only so many contracts to go around. The smaller villages only get second pickings, and there aren't enough contracts for all of them. That's why they fight against each other, to try and secure more business and money. The larger villages don't fight directly, but uses the Chunin exam as a proxy. Their conversation was interrupted by a pair of ninjas dressed in combat fatigues and wearing gas masks bursting up out of a puddle 50-odd feet ahead of them and wrapping the chain that the two of them held between them around thin air. The two of them ripped the chain taut and then crowed something at the air before they paused. What are they seeing? Natsumi asked as she leant towards Naruto. Us, he replied, but 50 feet forwards of where we are standing at the moment. So that chain would have been wrapped around Kushina-sensei. The fact it went straight through her probably alerted them to the fact it was an illusion. He was proven right as the two enemy ninjas spun around to face them, and each drew a kunai in their spare hand as they pulled the chain between the two of them. You couldn't have kept them under it a little longer? Natsuki shouted. We could have taken them out easy. No, he sighed. The illusion would grab anyone who looked at it, and to do that I had to sacrifice some of its strength. Plus, I wouldn't have been able to simulate the difficulty of pulling the train through a body without a stronger illusion. Let's take them out then, Natsuki shouted. Okay, you two charge forward, Naruto shouted, as he started to make some hand signs and extended his chakra out to the enemy ninjas. The twins started to run forward, but Naruto grabbed them and stopped them. At their expressions, he resumed. I've just put them in another illusion, letting them think you're charging forward. Flank round and take them out from the sides. His words were proven true when the enemy ninjas, the demon brothers from Kushina's muttered words, stopped halfway and appeared to engage in elaborate dance, swinging the chain between them and attempted to wrap it around thin air. They stabbed out with kunai multiple times, but appeared unsatisfied with the result. Their illusionary battle was interrupted by the twins jumping at them from either side, a pair of axe kicks braining both of the brothers and knocking them to the ground unconscious. Well done, Kushina started, having barely moved during the fight as her daughters tied up the demon brothers with ninja wires. The demon brothers are a pair of Chunin rank missing nin, more than capable of taking out your average genin. That the three of you defeated them without taking any injuries speaks volumes of your skills. I think I'll be recommending you for the Chunin exams, Payne. All right, the twins yelled, jumping up and high-fiving in midair. Still, Kushina continued, they shouldn't be here. Anything you want to tell us, Tazuna? I'm sorry, Tazuna began, regret evident on his face. But Gato's been oppressing our home for too long. We had to do something. Please, you have to help us. If you don't, my daughter and grandson will be brutally killed and our home burnt. Laying it on a bit thick, aren't you? Naruto muttered, mostly to himself, although Natsuki let out a small giggle. The Hokage suspected something was wrong with this mission, and we've been aware of Gato's activities for some time. Kushina continued, ignoring Naruto's mutters, and our team has been given the authorization to accept a higher-ranked mission for the appropriate increase in cost. But we can't afford it, Tazuna cried. If we could, we would have simply done that to begin with. Like the other major villages, Konoha can afford to have you pay gradually rather than in one go. Or if we can speak with a member of the daimyo's family or government, I'm sure the Hokage can work out a trade agreement or similar. I can't speak for the daimyo, Tazuna said, choking back tears. Gato killed him, but that sounds super to me. Anyway, Kushina continued, giving Tazuna a moment of privacy. We can expect stiffer resistance from this point on. The demon brothers are known for their teamwork, but they often work with other Kiri missing nins. Any idea which, sensei? Naruto asked, hoping for a little more information. Probably one of the rogue members of the Seven Swordsmen, she replied. There's some of Kiri's higher-ranked missing nin. Think you'll be able to handle them, Kushina-sensei? Naruto asked, faking worry in his voice. Course I can, Tebane, she shouted whilst glared at him, before turning to the unconscious bodies of the demon brothers. A few moments later, and the bodies had disappeared into a seal, and the scroll it was drawn on returned to wherever she had brought it from. Sealing, Kushina-sensei? Naruto asked. Is that seal strong enough to hold them? Oh, she replied, as the group started moving off again. I didn't know you had an interest in sealing. Maybe I can teach you some. Anyway, I put a combination of seals on them, so they are perfectly secure, even if they weren't unconscious. But keep your attention on the surroundings. There will be another enemy. The mist was much thicker here now that they had actually crossed over into the land of waves. Every member of the team had some sort of weapon in their hands. Kushina had her katana drawn, and the twins had a kunai in each hand, whilst Naruto had a handful of Senbon. His other hand was being held in a hand seal, keeping up the Genjutsu that hid their spread-out formation from view. Under that, another illusion hid Tazuna from view from where he was standing behind Kushina and projected a false Tazuna in the middle of the formation. The illusion. All of them were on edge. There hadn't been any attacks since the Demon Brothers' failed attempt, and the closer they got to Tazuna's home, the more and more likely the chance got that they would be attacked. It would be easier to hit Tazuna while he was en route, rather than allow them to set up proper defenses. There was a sudden rustling in the bushes to the side of the path, something that caused Natsuki to start and throw a kunai towards the sound. Sorry, she whispered, moving towards the bush and pulling out a shaking white rabbit along with her kunai. Guess I'm a little jumpy. That rabbit shouldn't be white this time of year, Naruto murmured to himself just as Kushina yelled out. Down! The three genin dived to the floor at their sensei's shout as she dragged the real Tazuna to the ground, just as a huge sword swung through the air, cutting straight through the illusionary Tazuna and burying itself in a nearby tree, just in time for a ninja to land upon it. The man was tall and muscled, wearing a pair of Kiri camouflage trousers with a great deal of his body wrapped in bandages. He had dark hair, spiked up behind his slashed-through Kiri headband. The sword itself was 6 feet of dull steel, a hole punched through it at the top, and another punch through the lower front edge. Zabuza Momochi, Kushina hissed, the demon of the mist. You've heard of my reputation then? Zabuza replied. I've certainly heard of you. Kushina Uzumaki, although I can't say your name is the most flattering, the red hot-blooded habanero. Anyway, hand over Tazuna, and I'll let you go without messing up your little genin. Aren't they your children? He let loose a great surge of killing intent with that, hoping to unsettle Kushina and the team. Kushina shook it off easily and turned to her team, each of whom looked a little shaken. Natsumi and Natsuki had both gone a little pale, having been exposed to killing intent when their parents were training them, whilst Naruto was starting to sweat a little as well, not having been the target of such a high-level intent before. Oka-san, Natsumi muttered, who is this? Zabuza was a member of the Seven Swordsmen before he abandoned Kiri after trying to kill the Mizukichi. His strengths are silent killing, Genjutsu using the Kubikirabocho, and Suiton Ninjutsu. Her words were interrupted by Zabuza lunging forward from his higher position, pulling his sword free as he did so and raising it over his head. Kushina darted forward to meet his strike, drawing her sword and slashing it across Zabuza's chest with an Iryōjutsu strike before he had a chance to bring his great cleaver down. Rather than blood leak from the wound, there was only water, and soon after the Zabuza clone dispersed. Kushina ducked a second sudden strike from behind before straightening up and pivoting round on her right foot and slicing straight through Zabuza's neck. Another moment revealed this too to be a clone, and as the mist got thicker she called out. Naruto, support me from a distance. Girls, you protect Tazuna. Zabuza may still have more accomplices. Okay, Naruto responded, quickly formulating a plan on how he could support his sensei. He could stand up to Zabuza in direct combat, and he'd just get in the way. Genjutsu it was then. Two Genjutsu he knew could be effective here. Demonic illusion, unhealing wounds, and demonic illusion. Silent senses, the others he knew wouldn't work on an opponent of his caliber or would probably end up impeding Kushina as well. Demonic illusion, unhealing wounds was just that. One of the few Genjutsu that couldn't be dispelled by pain and made every wound feel deeper and more painful. Demonic illusion, silent senses was a sensory deprivation jutsu, one that he would only be able to hold for a second or so against Zabuza, but that could make all the difference if he timed it right and allowed Kushina to get in a critical strike. Naruto quickly flashed through the hand seals and wrapped Zabuza in the former illusion before dipping his hand into his pouch and pulling out a pair of Senbon. Fuck subtlety, he muttered to himself as the two he had drawn were coated in some of the most virulent poisons in his armory. They had been made of the ground of leaves of a plant called Tiger's Bane that grew in the training ground 44, although he hadn't harvested them himself. The plant contained enough poison to bring down the huge tigers that lived in the forest, hence its name. He threw the two and wasn't surprised that Zabuza easily knocked them out of the air. They were aimed at lethal spots in his body, even if he didn't know about the poison. Although he did have to take a nasty gash down his arm from Kushina, so it wasn't a total loss. Ignoring the constant clanging of the two Jonin's swords, Naruto began to water walk onto the lake where they were battling to find a decent vantage point to hit Zabuza, throwing more Senbon all the time. Gradually, he started to hit Zabuza, first with a hallucinogen in the calf, and then a paralyzing agent in the arm. Slowly, he began to see the effects of the two as Zabuza's aim became more erratic and Kushina started to gain an advantage. Zabuza jumped back suddenly, holding the stab wound Kushina had inflicted on his right shoulder, and began making hand seals before calling out. Suetun, Water Dragon Bullet. Shit. Kushina cursed before countering. Suetun, Water Wall. The dragon that was formed hit the partially formed wall and destroyed it, although the technique fell apart before hitting Kushina. She began making more hand seals before a pair of Senbon suddenly sprouted from his throat and he toppled over. Naruto frowned. That positioning seemed familiar. Thank you for your assistance, a voice called out from the tree line. I have been tracking him for some time now. The hunter Nin that had spoken appeared to be from Kiri and was wearing a long battle kimono and a patterned mask. As they began moving towards Zabuza's body, Naruto finally remembered where he had seen that positioning of Senbon before. They're on Zabuza's side. Naruto shouted as he lunged forward, a Senbon in each hand being thrown towards the false hunter Nin before he tried to stab them with another pair. That's a false death state. The fake easily blocked Naruto's strikes and lashed out with a kick, hitting him in the chest and throwing him onto his back and forcing him to roll a few feet before he could stand up. The fake then began running towards Zabuza's body, only to have to jump backwards to avoid Kushina's swings when she appeared out of a body flicker before them. Kushina continued to press the fake back only for them to dive backwards into what appeared to be a mirror and appear out of another one a short distance away. Naruto quickly moved forward again and engaged the fake with his Senbon as well as starting to weave Genjutsu around them. The first few were highly effective, pushing the fake's perception away from Naruto's position, allowing him to get some decent hits in, although he wasn't using any poisoned Senbon this time. Unfortunately, the pain from each of these hits dispersed the illusions, and the fake quickly wised up and began dispelling them before they could take hold. Naruto, however, wasn't doing much better. He had taken plenty of hits, as the fake was much faster than him, as well as a little stronger. He was soon overwhelmed, and the fake paralyzed his shoulder and forced him back before turning to Zabuza's floating body, which had Kushina standing over it, her word raised in an executioner's stance. Master! The fake cried, before throwing more than a handful of Senbon towards Kushina with a cry of, Hayaton, 1,000 needles. Kushina only had a moment to dive out of the way before the huge wave of icicles passed through where she had been standing a moment before. Naruto took the opportunity to lodge another pair of Senbon in Zabuza's body, just as the fake reached it, and dived into another ice mirror whilst holding his, apparently alive, corpse. Shit. Naruto cursed as he moved towards his sensei, who was plucking the few needles that had hit her out of her leg. They got away. They're both pretty hurt, though, Kushina added, as the two of them turned back to the twins who were looking rather impressed next to a worried Tazuna. Hit him with anything good? A hallucinogen and a paralyzing agent during the fight, Naruto replied. And one of the Senbon I hit him with at the end was a weak, undetectable poison. What about the other? Laxative. After their encounter with Zabuza, Team 1 made good progress towards Tazuna's village. Naruto may have been tired, but Kushina had recovered quickly and the twins were still fresh, so the three of them ended up taking the most of the guard duties. Tazuna himself seemed both impressed and scared, impressed that his guards were so strong and scared that their opponent was too. Soon they arrived at Tazuna's home, built on stilts over the water and a little way outside the rest of the village. They were greeted at the door by a worried young woman with long blue hair, who quickly embraced Tazuna and began fussing over him. Oda-san, you're okay. I was worried about you. We both were dash. She paused, then leaned in and sniffed him. Have you been drinking again? You know the doctor told you that it was bad for your health. Yes, well, Tazuna replied, shifting nervously. I've been under a lot of stress recently, and I may have had 1 or 2 drinks to calm my nerves. Really? The woman replied icily, the twins looking on with a grin. 1 or 2. Anyway, I'm Tazuna's daughter, Tsunami, and you should all come inside. I imagine you're rather tired. Inari, come say hello to these people. They're the ninja who protected your G-san. Inari appeared to be a young boy with angry dark eyes glaring out from underneath his hat. He stared at them for a moment before turning around and running off deeper into the house. Ah, Inari. Tsunami called, before turning back to them as they sat down. I'm very sorry about that. He hasn't been the same since. Well, he hasn't been the same recently. You didn't run into any trouble on your way here, did you? Well, Kushina started. We did have a few problems. As she continued to tell Tsunami of the fights on the way there, the twins shouting out comments occasionally, Naruto turned his attention to his wounds. Other than physical tiredness and minor chakra use, he hadn't taken much damage, so he was able to take care of his wounds with what meager medical skills he had. A few minutes later, and his scratches were all healed up along with the large bruise formed the fake's kick and the minor paralysis of his shoulder. Putting away the bandages and other medical gear back into the storage scroll that then went into the large pouch in the small of his back, he turned to Kushina, who had gotten quite fired up with her story. Kushina-sensei, he interjected, I'm going to secure the perimeter and do some scouting. I'll be back in a bit. Okay, Kushina replied, looking him over as she did so. Are you sure you've recovered from the fight? Hi, sensei. All right then. Girls, you go with him, she added, turning to her daughters. Take your trapping supplies and trap the areas surrounding the house. If you can find out any more information about Gato, we might be able to take care of him sooner rather than later. About an hour or so later, Naruto, Natsuki and Natsumi had finished placing traps around Tazuna's home. The girls had mainly stuck to explosive notes on proximity triggers and scattered a great deal of them all around the house in a vague circle, whilst Naruto had picked out the most likely approaches in areas that appeared to be free of explosive notes that an enemy might jump to, and aimed Senbon launchers towards them. Fortunately, he had had time to refill his pouches with Senbon tipped with various poisons and still had plenty of poison left to cover the tips of the Senbon and the launchers with. After that had been done, the three of them had made their way into town and were currently walking through what was left of it. All of the houses looked seriously run down, and a great deal of the shops were shut. Most of the civilians looked at their headbands with fear, and mothers pulled their children closer to them as they walked past. Gato's really done a number on this place, hasn't he? Natsumi muttered. Most of them won't even meet our eyes, Naruto added. Where do you reckon Gato is hiding? Natsuki asked. I doubt he would stay in the village. He's probably got a compound near the village, Naruto replied. That would allow him to keep his mercenaries close by. You two go look for it, and if you find it, see if you can tell how many mercenaries there are. I'll stay in the village, see if I can capture one of Gato's men for interrogation. Hi, the twins replied before speeding off out of the run downtown. Naruto stopped walking and took a long look around. None of the villagers were near him or meeting his eyes, and he doubted he would get any decent information out of them if they were too afraid to talk to him. None of them looked like mercenaries, and even if they did, he would have thought Gato's men would at least sneer at him or something similar. He started walking again, wandering past boarded-up buildings and underfed children. A few minutes later, and he came across a young woman in a pink kimono walking out of a herbalist shop. She had long black hair and pale skin, and unlike the other villagers, seemed to be unafraid to meet his gaze. She would probably be his best bet for getting some information that didn't come out in a stutter and laced with fear, so Naruto walked over to her, attempting to look non-threatening. Excuse me, civilian-san, he started. Could I speak with you a moment? Oh. She replied, looking neutral although her eyes seemed to be glaring at him rather intensely. How can I help you, ninja-san? I was wondering if you could tell me anything about Gato and his men. My team and I have been hired to protect Tazuna-san while he completes his bridge. I'm afraid I don't know anything about that, she replied. I'm just here to buy some herbs for my father. He's been injured, and I have to get back to him. Oh, Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head. I'm sorry to keep you then. I hope he gets better soon. Thank you, ninja-san, she stated pleasantly, although her teeth seemed to be gritted and her tone forced as she walked away. I'll be sure to pass on your condolences. Naruto stared after her as she walked away. Something wasn't quite right about her, but he couldn't put his finger on it. She was rather attractive, though. He turned around and nearly jumped out of his skin in surprise to see his teammates standing behind him, Natsumi looking rather bemused, if a little irate, and Natsuki looking really rather angry. So, Natsuki forced out through gritted teeth, stomping towards him and grabbing his collar. Did you have fun trying to capture your enemy for interrogation? That girl looked really dangerous. Tabeo. Natsuki, is there a reason you're glaring at Naruto so much? Kushina asked her daughter. Team 1 were currently sat in Tazuna's home, having returned after gathering as much information on Gato as they could. Outside it was starting to get dark, although the moonlight reflecting of the water in the bay would keep the area bright enough to spot anyone approaching the house. Yeah, she shouted, throwing her hands up as she did so. Me and Sumi went of trying to find where Gato was hiding, avoiding all his guards and gathering all the intelligence. And when we come back, we find Naruto talking to some pretty Nachon. You were gone for 10 minutes. Naruto rebutted, ignoring Tazuna's snickers. I never said it was difficult, and that's not the point. Natsuki yelled, causing Inari to look up from where he was sulking in the corner. We were the ones doing all the work whilst you were flirting with the villagers. I had a perfectly good reason for talking to her, Naruto replied calmly, refusing to be baited. I wanted to get some information from the villagers, so I choose to talk to the only one who would meet my eyes. Seems like an odd way to pick your target, Kushina asked, although Tsunami seemed like she was trying to remember something. Yeah, Naruto responded. She kind of stuck out a bit, and not just because she was pretty Natsuki. Anyway, Kushina said, quickly defusing the argument. What did you learn about Gato? He's got a walled compound a couple of 100 meters outside the south side of the village, Natsumi replied, cutting of her sister, As for guards, we could only see mercenaries and no more than 100 of them. Gato-s unlikely to have any more missing nin, Kushina said, only to be interrupted by Natsuki. Why not? Missing nin tend not to work well with each other, unless they deserted as a group like Zabuza's did. Kushina continued. The only missing nin he might be able to recruit are former members of Kiri, but the higher-ranking ones are composed almost entirely of the 7 swordsmen, and their most recent generation was notorious for having each member want nothing to do with the others. Oh, Natsumi said, looking rather thoughtful, while Natsuki just grimaced. And with Zabuza out of the picture for the time being, Kushina added, it would be best to strike at Gato sooner rather than lat dash. You'll never be able to defeat Gato, Inari yelled, startling most of the people in the room. He's too powerful. Everyone he tried to fight him died. Gato-s, just a businessman, Naruto replied, turning to talk to the angry young child. While he wields significant economic power, all his military power comes from his money he uses to hire mercenaries. And if we kill him or steal all his money, Natsumi continued, picking up on Naruto's train of thought, all those mercenaries will leave. Some might even decide to kill Gato if he reneges on their payment. And that's what we are planning now, Kushina finished. We've scouted the area and Zabuza, our only similarly ranked opponent, is out of action, so we'll attack Gato-s compound tonight. Natsumi and Naruto, you'll be with me. Natsuki, you'll stay here in case Zabuza's subordinates have recovered and try to take advantage of our absence. Hi, Natsuki replied, her expression downcast and unwilling to go against orders. But I was looking forward to a good fight. If this was a normal C rank, I'd let you handle it yourselves and stay here myself, Kushina replied, giving her daughter a comforting hug. But it's not, and I don't want to risk you guys getting hurt. Tebang. The heartwarming moment was broken by Natsuki and Natsumi glancing at each other and trying not to laugh at their Kushina's verbal tick. They weren't particularly good at either, Kushina's eye developing a twitch and her face reddening slightly as she tightened her hug into a headlock. Stop laughing at me. Tebane, Kushina shouted, causing another wave of sniggers before she started grinding her knuckles into her Natsuki's skull. Night fell fairly soon, casting the pall of darkness over the entire village. Few, if any, houses emitted light, most of the villagers too poor to afford it with Gato cracking down on them. Natsuki had seen the rest of her team off before plunging Tezuna's house into darkness, hoping it would bring a little extra anonymity. The rest of her team were silently moving through the trees towards Gato-s compound, each of them having changed into the darker colors they used on their nighttime missions. Kushina had already told the 2 genin of their parts in the plan. While she was off dealing with Gato and the stronger guards who would be with him, the 2 of them would cover each other and eliminate the rest of Gato-s mercenary army. The 3 of them stopped suddenly at a gesture from Kushina, only a few tree hops separating them from the walls of the compound. She watched the guards for a minute or so, then gave 3 quick gestures, a closed fist followed by open hand with 5 fingers outstretched, then a sharp forward tilt of her palm. Moments later, she leapt forwards, blurring into the darkness and leaving Naruto and Natsumi waiting in the gloom of the trees. The 2 of them had already agreed on a course of action. Natsumi would be following Naruto's lead as he put the bandits under a Genjutsu. Then Natsumi would use this to guide her to her own targets. They would try to maintain stealth as long as possible, so neither would use their flashier attacks unless they were discovered, although in truth Naruto had very few flashy attacks. 5 minutes after Kushina had vanished, the 2 genin crept forward and jumped onto the walls of the compound. The compound was a vague square marked by wooden walls surrounding a few buildings. One was Gato-s personal home, whilst the others stored loot, as well as providing living quarters for the mercenaries. The walls had a few covered sections at each corner, the only sections where there were lights, which happened to be illuminating the guards who were skimping on their patrols. Naruto and Natsumi crept towards the first guard post, Naruto casting a Genjutsu to hide them from sight as an extra precaution. A peek inside revealed a single guard, slumped against a wall, looking out into the gloom and nursing a cigarette. Naruto gestured towards Natsumi, then the guard, receiving a nod in return, then started to head to the next guard point, ignoring the choked-off scream and the dull thump of a body being pitched over the wall. The next section had a pair of guards in it, both of them casually talking to each other. Naruto moved closer to them, then flicked a pair of Senbon forward, easily hitting both of the stationary targets in their necks at such close range. Moving over to their corpses, he retrieved his Senbon, then hoisted one of the bodies up onto his shoulder and throwing it over the walls, Natsumi doing the same with the other to his left. The next guard was actually patrolling a section of the walls. Not that it did him any good. Natsumi stabbing him in the throat with a kunai and Naruto throwing his cooling corpse over the wall in one quick expression of excellent teamwork. His guard post was empty, as was the last one. The sounds of revelry from one of the nearby buildings easily telling the two genin where their last target had gone. Making sure that his Genjutsu was still covering the two of them, Naruto led Natsumi down towards the sounds of merriment and peeked through the window at the laughing mercenaries. There were several dozen of them inside, each clutching a dish, presumably full of sake, although not all of them were still upright. Gesturing towards Natsumi, the two genin backed away from the building and into one of the deeper shadows. "We won't be able to take that many mercenaries and maintain stealth," Naruto murmured, Natsumi nodding at his words. "Have you still got those explosive tags that Kushina-sensei gave us?" "I have," Natsumi whispered in reply. "A couple on each wall should do it, right?" "Yeah," Naruto responded. "You apply those. I'll check there aren't any more in the other buildings." Naruto stealthily walked over to the other two buildings as Natsumi moved deeper into the shadows and began sticking tags to walls. A quick check of the first building revealed it to be empty save for stacks of food and money, while the second had a few sleeping mercenaries in some of the beds with the others empty. The sleeping men quickly took a knife to the throat each, and after that Naruto crept back out and met up with Natsumi, who was waiting for him at the same place he had left her. As he approached, Natsumi turned and led him back up onto the wall, into a commanding position overlooking the building full of mercenaries. Natsumi twisted her fingers into the release hand seal and crouched down, Naruto quickly following her lead as the building exploded, cries of laughter abruptly turning into cries of pain. With bits of debris still clattering down around them, Naruto and Natsumi leapt over the wall and onto those few mercenaries who had survived, none of them seeing the two shadows drop from the sky until it was too late. It was more a slaughter than a fight, none of the mercenaries in any condition to fight back, even if they had had the skill to oppose ninja. When the last cry had gurgled away, the two genin ran towards the last building, Gato's home itself. They sprinted through the halls, past the bodies of various guards, each one with an expression of considerable surprise on their faces. Probably at how far that face was from its body. A few minutes later they reached what they presumed was Gato's study. Kushina was there, perched on the edge of a desk, calmly wiping the blood from her katana with a cloth with the bodies of Gato's personal guards collapsed in the corners. There was a painting hanging off the wall by one edge revealing a safe behind it, with the door to that ripped off. Gato was there as well, or at least his body was, his head appearing to have disappeared. "Nasty little man," Kushina remarked as she saw where they were looking, called me a whore then tried to bribe me to save his life. "So he's been dealt with then, sensei?" Naruto asked, relaxing slightly. "He's dead if that's what you're asking," Kushina replied. "But he put out an open contract for quite a bit of money on his killer when he died, as a last little bit of revenge." "But no one knows we killed him," Natsumi added. "And how's he going to pay it?" The cash has been lodged with the bounty hunters and their stations everywhere, so they'll put out the contract fairly quickly if they can work out who killed him, Kushina answered, sheathing her sword. But Zabuza will already know that it had to be us that killed him. Even if he isn't aware of the contract, he'll want to kill us since we killed his source of cash. In fact, it works out better for him if he does find out, even if the contract on Tazuna is no longer valid, as the reward for killing Gato's killer is worth more. So effectively, Naruto said thoughtfully, nothing has actually changed. Nope. Kushina replied happily. Konoha would have had to deal with Zabuza sooner or later. We can't let missing Nin of his level run around, and it will be a good experience for you three. On what? Naruto muttered as the three of them left Gato's study. How to get the crap kicked out of us. The next day came fairly quickly and found Team 1 in the forest surrounding the village of Nami. The three genin were still a little tired. Naruto and Natsumi from their late-night excursion, and Natsuki from staying up and waiting for them to return. Kushina seemed as perky as ever, even though this was only a shadow clone, the original guarding Tazuna at his bridge. Right, Kushina started, having led them into a small clearing. Seeing as Zabuza and his accomplices are still out of action, we'll be taking this chance to prepare. Natsumi, Natsuki, I want the two of you to practice your water walking. You still can't hold it for extended periods of time during combat. Can't we do something more important? Natsuki moaned. Surely there are some jutsu you can teach us that would be useful. The only jutsu I could teach you that you would be able to use are Suiton due to the water in our surroundings, Kushina replied, making a clone to watch over her daughters. But they wouldn't be of any use against a Kiranin of Zabuza's caliber, and you would have to practice them for some time before you could use them in other situations. All right then, Natsumi replied, pulling her sister out of the clearing after her mother's clone. As for you, Naruto, Kushina continued, there is little I can teach you, without starting on an entirely new subject, but I believe you have an interest in Fūinjutsu? Yeah, I do, Naruto replied, a little confused. But I didn't think you could teach me Uzumaki-style Fūinjutsu? I can't. Not unless you marry one of my daughters, Kushina replied with a sly grin and Naruto's suddenly pale expression. But using Fūinjutsu in combat is the same regardless of style. Oh, Naruto asked, still trying to remove the horrible images from his mind. I don't imagine you've put much thought into it. You're more concerned with learning how to create them, right? Kushina asked. Anyway, using Fūinjutsu in combat requires you to prepare all of your designs in advance. You won't have time to draw them during the fight, and there are very few that can be created in combat, and then only by a skilled practitioner. The 5-element seal is a common one that I can create during combat, as well as a few others, while Minato-kun can apply dozens during combat. 5-element seal? Naruto questioned, what's that? It's a common seal used to disrupt the target's chakra flow, Kushina answered. I'll teach it to you later. Prevents them from walking on surfaces or using jutsu that requires precise control or large volumes of chakra. Anyway, that's not the main point of this conversation. You need to learn to anticipate the actions of an opponent and prepare seals to deal with them. I have several seals prepared to deal with the larger elemental jutsus, as well as one to deal with Zabuza's Kirigakure jutsu. I always carry dozens of explosive seals of varying strength, as well as storage scrolls and sealing supplies. How do you use sealing while anticipate an opponent's actions? Naruto asked. In general, you need to cover your weaknesses, Kushina replied, pulling a small book out of a pocket, unmarked save for the symbol of Konoha, but then that's obvious. However, if you know what opponent you'll be facing beforehand, like we do here, you can attempt to neutralize their strengths. The bingo book will contain useful information about an enemy, and if we look at Zabuza's entry, all it tells us is the same things we discovered during our fight with him. Wouldn't you want to attack an opponent's weaknesses, Naruto questioned, rather than their strengths? That would be much better, Kushina answered. But do we know any of Zabuza's weaknesses? We probably would have if we had fought him for longer and that applies to almost any enemy you face. No ninja will advertise their weakness, but most will depend on their particular strength, and if you shut it down, they'll be depending on something they can't use. Turning their strength into their weakness, Naruto mused thoughtfully. Exactly, Kushina continued. If you were in a fight with, say, Natsumi or Natsuki, and you managed to apply a 5-element seal, you would almost completely shut down their ability to use ninjutsu, save for perhaps shadow clones, and even that would be severely weakened, to mention what the interplay between the seals would do. If the 5-element seal is that common and dangerous to the girls, perhaps I should learn how to remove it as well as place it? Naruto said, idly wondering if it would be accepted during a spar. Probably won't be necessary, Kushina replied. There are very few nin capable of placing it during combat. I thought you said it was common? Naruto questioned, a little confused. It is amongst ninja who use Fūinjutsu in combat, Kushina said. But you are vastly overestimating how many ninja actually use Fūinjutsu at all. You've put in a lot of legwork during the academy, and most aren't willing to do the same. I don't think anyone lower than Jonin currently uses Fūinjutsu for anything other than storage scrolls, and barely half a dozen of them can use it during combat. It's a dying art. But it seems so easy, Naruto replied. Surely more ninja would use it? Oh, it seems easy at the moment, Kushina said. But if we go back to Zabuza and his Kirigakure jutsu, we know he will use it, but how will you counter it? You could disperse the mist, or create a method to see through it. You could concentrate it and use it for another technique. If we choose to disperse it, do we increase the amount of area it should cover, or do we siphon out the chakra? We could blow it away with futon or cause it to rise with a katon. Each of these would need a radically different seal, and Zabuza may be able to counter some of them, so you have to choose carefully. Which seal are you carrying then, Kushina-sensei? Naruto asked, her words ringing in his ears. I'm a Jonin, Naruto, Kushina replied with a giggle. And more than that, I'm an Uzumaki. I'm carrying all of them. Kushina's shadow clone puffed away after that, leaving Naruto to develop his techniques in secret, as was right and proper for an aspiring ninja. Naruto had found her talk on Fūinjutsu quite helpful, although he wasn't quite sure how he was going to apply it in combat. He had come across fire suppression seals before, and could see how those could be used in combat to counter fire jutsus, but they were one-use only and would have to be saved for the truly dangerous techniques, rather than the ones he could just avoid. However, Naruto wasn't quite sure how he could do the same for the other elements. The fire suppression seal was developed to prevent houses from burning down, not unless there was a water suppression seal out there. Now that he had some privacy, though, Naruto was going to try out the Shadow Clone Jutsu. He wouldn't use it for combat. It was just too flimsy and his fighting style couldn't accommodate making too many. But having one hidden and casting Genjutsu while he engaged an opponent at close quarters might be helpful. His own personal support as were. Carefully placing his fingers into the same cross-shaped seal he had seen the rest of his team use so many times, he molded his chakra into the same shape he used for a standard clone and envisioned where he wanted it to form. There was a sudden, heavy pull at his chakra and then a puff of smoke, clearing after a moment to reveal an exact copy of himself standing there. All solid. He wheezed out as the clone poked itself. That jutsu had taken fully half of his chakra, and he was feeling the strain. As far as I can tell, yes, the clone replied, but I don't appear to be in as bad a condition as you are. Rub it in, why don't you? Naruto groaned, slumping to the ground and leaning against a nearby tree. Any idea why? Well, you only have half of all of your chakra right now, the clone replied after a few moments. But that half of your chakra is all of the chakra I've ever had. Guess we're not completely identical, eh? Naruto murmured, his breath slowly returning to its normal rate. How do you reckon the twins do it so easily? Practice. The clone shrugged. Half is still half, though, so maybe their chakra regenerates quickly? Speaking of practice, We might as well make a start, Naruto said, getting to his feet, his breaths evened off. We don't have a target for a single-layered Genjutsu, the clone responded, gesturing towards a nearby tree. So an area Genjutsu on that stump? Naruto and his clone spent the next few hours casting Genjutsu, watching how they interacted and bouncing new ideas off of each other. It turned out that area-layered Genjutsu were not the best of idea, as Naruto's layers affected his clone and vice versa, although hopefully that wouldn't be the case with single Genjutsu. They kept practicing even as the sun went down, resorting to light sparring whilst trying to keep their opponent under an illusion. It was difficult at first, but as they got used to it, their concentration improved and Naruto felt confident enough to add a second layer, if only against opponents of his own caliber. Eventually, the clone popped from lack of chakra, stunning Naruto slightly at the small return of some of his chakra into his own system. He sat down heavily, the tiny influx a reminder to him of just how tired he actually was, having slowly been draining himself of energy the entire day. Relaxing onto his back, Naruto stared up at the night sky through the thin canopy, much less thick than that of the vast forest that Konoha was located in. He yawned once then again, and assured himself that he would head back to Tezuna's in a moment. He'd just close his eyes for a moment first. E.P. E.P. Naruto blinked his eyes open as a shadow fell across his face, blocking out the sunlight, even as a hand touched his shoulder for a moment. He was greeted by a familiar face, her long black hair brushing slightly against his face as he resisted the urge to slap her hand away from him. "You shouldn't be sleeping out here," she said, her face suddenly gaining a smile. "You could catch a cold." "Sorry," Naruto replied, matching her expression, glad that he was as light a sleeper as any other ninja, not feeling comfortable being asleep and vulnerable around someone he didn't know or trust. "Guess I was just tired." "What were you doing out here to get so tired?" she asked, retreating back a few feet and glancing around the mostly untouched clearing. Naruto noted her movements, eyeing the gap between them, ideal for casting a jutsu, and quickly got to his feet. "Just a little exercise," Naruto replied, moving round the clearing so that the direction of Tezuna's home was at his back, even as the women circled round, keeping the gap between them the same. Naruto grimaced internally. Those were the actions of another ninja, not those of a civilian. "Yourself?" he continued. "It's quite early to be out." "Just gathering some herbs," she replied, her basket moving to a position that kept her hands free, confirming Naruto's fears. He still wasn't entirely awake, and her features matched those of Zabuza's accomplice, someone he already knew to be stronger than himself, and someone who was already aware of his preference towards Genjutsu. His only response to this situation could be a quick retreat, but at least he had learned something. If she was gathering herbs as she had said, and she was unlikely to have lied as there was little else she could be doing, and he recognized a few of the herbs he had caught a glimpse of, that meant that Zabuza was still yet to recover. Naruto couldn't be certain if she had found a remedy to his poisons, but he would have to assume the worst and inform the rest of his team, if he could survive to reach them. Naruto waited until she began to take a step, then quickly threw a brace of Senbon towards her before turning and fleeing. He quickly jumped onto the branches and cursed the thinness of the canopy as he heard another set of footsteps heard the trees a few branches back. A quick few hand seals cast an illusion over the next few trees, subtly shifting the positions of the branches even as two icicles thudded into the tree trunk near his ear. He sped up and headed straight through his own illusion, smiling to himself as he heard the crack of branches and curses as she fell to the ground. He wasn't in the clear though, more icicles flying past him, some sticking into the underside of the tree, while others perforated the leaves around him. Naruto suddenly zigzagged as he caught a glimpse of something shining to his left, avoiding another wave of icicles as the female ninja dived out of the mirror and into another, only to appear off to his right in another. Another Genjutsu confused her for a moment, and gained him a precious reprieve, bringing him ever closer to Tizuna's home and safety. It was, however, all too brief, as a salvo of icicles caught him in the back of his right leg as he made a jump, causing him to miss his landing and tumble out of the trees and onto the surface of the water. He was less than 100 meters from Tizuna's home, and he let out a loud yell, even as he dragged himself onwards, flipping over and returning fire towards the black-haired ninja, who was still heading towards him. She easily knocked a few of his Senbon out of the air, dodging around the rest, and continuing to head towards him. He let out another shout and started searching for a target to substitute with, anything to give his potential rescuers time to arrive and give him a little more space from the oncoming ninja. Unable to find a target on the empty lake and now too far to find a log from the forest, Naruto ceased his water walking, dropping through the surface of the lake even as a set of foot-long icicles went straight through where he had been lying only moments before. Naruto peered through the few feet of water separating him from the surface, waiting for the enemy ninja to enter his line of sight, the occasional bubble floating up from the surface from his mouth. He wondered how long it would take them to reach him and finish him off, no longer able to retreat any further. Naruto's musings were cut off as a hand suddenly grasped his collar and yanked him to the surface, bringing him face to face with Kushina's rather irate expression, the black-haired kunoichi nowhere in sight. "Where the hell have you been?" Kushina asked through gritted teeth. "And why do I come out to find you under attack?" "I fell asleep after training," Naruto replied sheepishly, as Kushina helped him limp towards Tizuna's home. "Looks like you found out just how stupid and dangerous that is," Kushina said, helping him up onto the dock and into the house. "You knew Zabuza and his apprentice were in the area. You were lucky she didn't kill you as soon as she saw you." Noted, Naruto deadpanned. Still, she appeared to be gathering herbs, so it will be likely he'll be healed soon. Especially if she felt secure enough that he could defend himself without her, Kushina murmured thoughtfully, before turning back to Naruto. "But learning that doesn't offset you idiocy. If I hadn't awoken early and heard your yells, you would have died less than 100 meters from us, and we would have even known." "Hi, Sensei," Naruto grumbled as he sat down to the worried expressions of the twins, Tsunami also looking a little worried as she began making breakfast. "And you're also injured," Kushina continued, taking up a lecturing position at the table. "So you'll be a liability in combat, unless you heal by the time Zabuza makes his move, which is unlikely, seeing as he'll try to take advantage of your injury just as we took advantage of his." "Nice going, Naruto," Natsuki snarked. Naruto ignored her instead, taking the time to start patching up his wounds, which luckily weren't too deep. His muscles had taken a little damage which he patched up with a medical technique, although it would take him a few days to heal completely with a bit of assistance. "So you'll be staying to guard the house from now on with one of my clones," Kushina added, ignoring her daughter's interruption. "And girls, you'll be with me at the bridge from now on." Naruto woke late the next day when Tizuna and the rest of his team left for the day's work at the bridge. With Kushina's clone downstairs chatting to grateful Tsunami with Inari, having undergone a sudden change in attitude recently due to Gato's sudden demise, happily listening in to their conversation, Naruto woke up and dressed slowly before heading down to have something to eat. He was busy changing the bandages around his leg when Kushina's clone sat bolt upright, startling Tsunami and drawing everyone's attention. "Zabuza and his apprentice are at the bridge," she said, quickly getting to her feet. "Naruto, join up with Tizuna and relieve the girls' clones. They'll need their attention on the apprentice." Naruto nodded in assent, swallowing the last of his food and heading out as Kushina's clone continued speaking to Tsunami. "Tsunami, you and Inari need to stick with me while we move you two to a safer area." Having moved out of earshot, Naruto took to the trees, wincing with every jump he took. His leg hadn't completely healed, Though the partly healed wounds the Senbon-like icicles had left were not the most difficult to mend. It only took a few minutes for Naruto to reach the bridge at the fastest pace he could manage, hitting the start of the bridge before entering a brief, thin mist, then a clearing at the far end. He began to be able to hear the clangs of one sword on another. Then the backs of Tauna and the girls came into view. "What have I missed?" Naruto asked, startling the two girls and nearly causing Natsuki to take his head off. "Careful." "Sorry," the clone muttered, before turning her attention back to the visible fight. Zabuza was fending off a pair of Kushinas with broad strokes of his greatsword, while the two women kept up an endless barrage of quick attacks against him. "You can see how Sensei's doing, but the apprentice is hard to pin down. He moves too quickly." "He?" Naruto questioned. "The apprentice is a girl, the one we met in the village." "You tried to chat up a missing nin?" Natsumi's clone asked, surprised, then tried to keep a teasing expression off her face. "That'll be something to talk about. Remember that time Naruto tried to date a missing nin?" "We're never going to let you live that down." Natsuki's clone giggled. "Still, thanks for relieving us. We need to help our bosses." Wait. Natsumi's clone injected as Naruto mouthed the word bosses to himself. "Us dispersing won't make much difference. We still won't be able to shut down her speed, but you might be able to." "Naruto's injured though," Natsuki's clone replied, before glancing at his leg. "Unless it's all healed?" "No, it's not," Naruto answered. "But I won't be engaging in direct combat, so it should be okay." "Be careful then," Natsumi's clone added as he ran round the three jonins, Natsuki's clone and Tizuna nodding along with her. Naruto drew a pair of Senbon with his right hand and a kunai in his left as he headed into the thin mist where the twins were supposed to be fighting. He knew the apprentice had a similar preference as he did for Senbon, and they were much easier to block with a kunai than with another Senbon. She had already shown herself able to disrupt his Genjutsu, so there was no reason to cast any until the twins could cover him. He jumped back suddenly as an icy mirror formed in front of him, the image of the masked apprentice held within. He deflected a set of Senbon thrown towards him, unable to dodge easily due to his slightly limited mobility. A second glint caused Naruto to dive to his right, the appearance of a second mirror and another apprentice throwing Senbon at him, nearly catching him out and ending the fight quickly. He spun round to face the new threat, idly pulsing his chakra in case it was a Genjutsu, only to see more than a dozen mirrors form and spread around him in a dome shape. After that, it took all Naruto could do to avoid me hit by the mini Senbon the apprentice was throwing. He had since thrown his own Senbon so he could hold another kunai, both being used to deflect any of the Senbon he couldn't dodge. The apprentice's Senbon, tiny icicles that they were, had melted onto the surface of the bridge, causing Naruto to have to expend his chakra to maintain his balance, while his own had bounced off doing little, if any, damage. Any attempt Naruto made to leave the dome were rebuffed by increased amounts of Senbon, and without any method to discern the real enemy from what he believed were after images, Naruto was unable to strike back at his opponent. Suddenly Naruto found himself almost yanked off of his feet and enveloped in a puff of smoke. Moments later it cleared and he found himself outside the dome besides the rest of his team, both of whom appeared to be out of breath. "I made a clone and had it substitute out with you," Natsumi said helpfully as the mirrors of the dome disappeared. "Much appreciated," Naruto replied. "How have you been fighting her so far?" "Her," Natsuki interjected. "I thought she was a boy." "She's the girl we met." Naruto let himself trail off, eyeing their surroundings before continuing. "Never mind." "Anyway," Natsumi said after a moment, "originally she trapped us in that dome technique, the same as you, but we created a clone each and substituted with them. Since then she's been harassing us with hit-and-run attacks," Natsuki continued, "and we've been trying to corral her to the end of the bridge so she'll have nowhere further to run. It's working, but it's slow going." Can either of you destroy the mirrors? Naruto asked, letting Senbon fly towards a mirror that appeared off to their left and being surprised at the lack of return fire as they bounced off the mirror. We can, but it takes time, Natsumi replied, the two girls adding a barrage of shadow kunai to his own thrown projectiles. In the end, it just pits our amount of chakra against hers, as apparently she can repair them. She has to make herself vulnerable if she wants to attack as well, Natsuki added, returning to scanning their surroundings as the mirror and its image disappeared, and she can move really quickly between mirrors. So that's how she was doing it, Naruto muttered, beginning to cast Genjutsu around them. A few moments later, he was rewarded by icicles thudding in the bridge a couple of meters away, even as the twin shadow kunai forced her to retreat back into her mirror to the right. This time, though, the mirror didn't disappear, the far edge of the bridge that was just in sight, showing she had nowhere to go. Instead, a second mirror formed some distance to the left. Seconds later, her image disappeared from the first mirror, becoming a blur of motion, throwing icicles before reappearing in the second mirror, then vanishing again. Naruto blocked those that would have hit the girls and him as they saturated the air between the two mirrors with kunai, a few smashing against the mirrors themselves. When the apprentice returned to the first mirror, her clothing was marred by blood and tears in the fabric, her mask sporting a single crack running up her left cheek and across the eye slit. Nearly got her, Natsumi murmured, her sister grinning in anticipation. Then was a roar of pain from behind them, the three of them long having since tuned out the sounds of swords clanging against another, and the apprentice's mask shot up as she turned to the source of the cry. Zabuza-sama, she cried, abandoning her mirror and quickly moving in an attempt to support him, completely ignoring her opponents. None of the three genin were going to let her reach him, several Senbon piercing deep into her back near her spine, their deadly poisons easily reaching her bloodstream, even as dozens of shadow kunai sank into her and knocked her off her feet. Team 1 slowly approached her prone body, Natsumi slipping a kunai under her body to rest against the apprentice's throat as she took her pulse. She looked up and shook her head, causing the team to turn their attention to the remainder of Kushina's battle with Zabuza. He had a great gash across his chest, blood pouring out of it, and staining his camouflage trousers. It was the most damaging wound he appeared to have, but far from the only one. Many smaller wounds scattered about his body. His left leg appeared to be lamed, and he was holding his bleeding chest with one hand, the kubikurabocho tightly held in his right as he desperately tried to fend off Kushina's katanas. Zabuza had since foregone the massive swings of his sword, now preferring quicker stabbing motions against the women who were quickly darting around and taking advantage of his lack of speed. A moment of error and he overextended one of his thrusts, causing himself to stumble, if only slightly. Nevertheless, one Kushina took quick advantage of his mistake, her crimson-handled katana cutting easily through his wrist, severing muscles and tendons, and forcing Zabuza to drop to his huge blade. He reared back and let out another cry of pain, only for it to be cut short as the second Kushina slipped her katana through the gaps between his ribs and up into his heart from behind. A few moments later, the Kushina behind Zabuza disappeared into smoke, the other stepping back as his corpse fell to the ground. The original Kushina beckoned them over, withdrawing a cloth and wiping clean the blood from her sword as they headed over to Tazuna and his clone bodyguards. Seeing everyone was all right, the last of the clones puffed away, bringing a smile to Natsuki's face. "So Naruto," she began, turning slightly to face him, "remember that time you tried to date a missing nin?"
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.